Chapter 44. Just when Chu Qingyan thought it was over, her eyes were quickly submerged by a touch of black. Then a force came from her waist, a warm touch with a hardness that couldn't be ignored. Then her feet spun, and she crashed into a chest with a clear breath. If it wasn't for the strong heartbeat echoing in her ears, she would have mistakenly thought that she had fallen into a green field. Her nose was filled with the scent of nature. It was so clean and comfortable that people couldn't help but want to hug it. Just when Chu Qingyan was about to fall into this illusion, she heard the sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. She was suddenly awakened. She immediately opened her eyes. Her eyes were still filled with a thick black, but the golden embroidery pattern was magnified. She suddenly raised her head, and coincidentally met with the slightly annoyed gaze above her. She then realized that she had been pulled by him, which was why she had been spared. Only the two's current movements. Chu Qingyan's hand was grabbing his collar, and her entire body was in his embrace. The small her was embedded in his embrace like this, as if it was natural. Only at this close did she realize that the eyes that were not covered by the mask were so charming. Looking at it sideways, the eyelashes that were covered were like curly love leaves, slender and thick. It made people's hearts itch, and they really wanted to reach out and touch it. But just as she had this thought, she immediately stopped. This was because she felt that the person in front of her had been looking at her the entire time. And she was staring at him with all her might, which was a hindrance to her ladylike demeanor. Even standing properly would cause you to fall? Qingyan, you're not the ordinary kind of stupid. His teasing came from above her head. Chu Qingyan was slightly stunned. This was the first time he had called her by her name, so she was a bit not used to it. But thinking about it, she didn't think it was strange. She couldn't help but lower her head and obediently admit her mistake. I didn't notice. It won't happen again. The person in his arms was small and light, just like a well-behaved rabbit. However, he knew that sometimes she would turn into a little kitten that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, or even a little hedgehog that was difficult to deal with. But at this time, she lowered her head slightly, looking obedient and harmless, which made his heart soften, and he couldn't help but want to tease her. He reached out to pinch her tender little face, his tone indifferent as he said, "Just now, you asked about the corruption in the imperial court. If this prince said that this matter was definitely related, what would you do?" Chu Qingyan did not expect that Xiao, who seemed unapproachable, would pinch her face like a pet. She was stunned. Although she was a 10-year-old lowly, she had the heart of a 20-year-old girl, okay? Her anger from being teased surged, but just as she was about to explode, she met his clear and penetrating eyes. She was instantly discouraged. It seemed that the other party really treated her like a little doll. Her heart that had been attacked heard his words, and all the hairs on her body stood on end. Could it be that this matter really was related to him? However, when she saw his nonchalant attitude, Chu Qingyan could not figure out what he was thinking. She thought about it carefully and put on a resolute expression, but she was actually speechless and crying inside. "My mother told me that if I marry a chicken, I will follow the chicken. If I marry a dog, I will follow the dog. Since His Majesty has bestowed Qingyan to your highness, then Qingyan will share weal and woe with your highness, and follow you in life and death." Although the words chicken and dog in Chu Qingyan's words did not reach his ears, he was satisfied with the overall meaning. Although he knew that she did not mean what she said, he liked to see her conflicted expression. "At least you're tactful." Xiao stroked her long hair as a reward. Chu Qingyan could not help wanting to jump off his legs. After all, men and women should not touch each other. But she did not have that burden. It was clear that he was angry just now. If she had not accidentally tripped, she would be waiting for his anger right now. Inadvertently noticing a faint blush on the little fellow's face, Xiao thought that she was afraid. He couldn't help sighing that this little fellow was really easy to tease. He had only said a few words, and she was scared. "Don't worry, no matter how bad this king is, I will not put my attention on these unorthodox things." Xiao normally did not like to explain, but right now he was thinking of comforting the little person in his arms, so he did not even think before blurting it out. But after he said it, he felt a bit of regret. Hearing this, Chu Qingyan couldn't help revealing a bright smile. I just knew that the Lord was not that kind of person. Her joy was written all over her face. This meant that she did not need to worry about Xiao Su losing power. As the future princess consort, where would she go? She also did not need to worry if her parents would be implicated because of this. It really made her happy. Perhaps it was because Chu Qingyan was relieved too quickly that Xiao Su was unhappy. His voice was cold as he said, "It's a pity that in court, you can't be cleared just because you're innocent. There are many people who frame others and take the blame for others. If it was done with malice, it would be hard to escape blame." His mocking words successfully made the smile on Chu Qingyan's face freeze. She slowly turned her head to look at him. From his eyes, she could see the cruelty of officialdom. She couldn't help asking, "Then will you be wrongly accused?" Perhaps it was the concern in her words that made Xiao Su's face soften. "You just said that this king was not that kind of person. Then in your eyes, what kind of person is this king?" Chu Qingyan felt that this person was really too much. They were clearly talking about one topic, but he was able to change the topic. But who told him to be the Lord? Qingyan feels that the Lord is a brave warrior. He is upright and can do anything. In Qingyan's heart, he is a great hero. This was her judgment from a little child's point of view. Xiao Su smiled as he pinched her nose. His voice had a clear smile and a domineering aura that did not allow people to look at him directly. "Since you say that this king is omnipotent, then how could I be easily schemed against? Unless this king is willing." Chu Qingyan's eyes couldn't help twitching. Wasn't this person a bit too arrogant? He was trying to trick a little child like her. She knew that adults like to boast of their omnipotence in front of little children in order to gain their admiration and envy. She never thought that this Xiao Su would also be like this, not being modest at all. But it wasn't until a long time later that she truly understood that what he said today wasn't a lie. Because she saw that he was willing, and her heart ached, and she shed tears because of his willingness. After teasing her a bit more, Xiao Su finally let her go. Only then did she react. Chu Qingyan had been held in his arms the entire time, so her face was slightly red. She did not dare raise her head to look at him. But it was also at this time that she saw that the corner of his clothes had been splashed with a few drops of ink. She could not help but look over, and saw the inkstone on the ground and the pool of ink. Only then did she realize that the sound she had heard before was the inkstone falling to the ground. This position was exactly where she had been standing. Fortunately, Xiao Su had pulled her up in time. Otherwise, with the heavy inkstone falling, her little feet would have been gone. After being shy, she felt a bit of gratitude towards him. It was a pity that a certain person said in an unreasonable manner, "You added too much water and the ink has melted." Chu Qingyan immediately gritted her teeth. This person was not worthy of gratitude at all. Chapter 45. When Lonnie came in, she immediately saw the mess on the ground. She also saw the ink on her lord's clothes. Although her lord was wearing black clothes, it could not hide the dampness. She was slightly surprised, but she quickly calmed down and began to clean up. Chu Qingyan smiled at her with a bit of embarrassment. Lonnie returned her smile, and then continued to clean up the ground. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but sigh. This girl really was like what the book said about beauty, that made people unable to look away. Just as Chu Qingyan was being smitten, Xiao Su's voice sounded. "Come here." Chu Qingyan heard this, and looked away from Lan Yi's body. She obediently walked in front of him. Right now he was sitting and she was standing, so they were at eye level. "Why is Lord calling for Qingyan?" she asked curiously. "From today onwards, this king will teach you how to read." As soon as Xiao Su's words fell, he successfully saw her expression change. He found it funny inside. Why? Because she was too shocked. Chu Qingyan didn't even think about it before blurting it out. The result of saying this without thinking was that it successfully made Xiao Su's tone turn cold. "If this king's princess can't read a single word, do you think you'll be the only one losing face? You look like you have a deep grudge. Do you think this king doesn't know how to teach you?" Chu Qingyan was deeply frozen by these cold words. She couldn't even shake her head. She quickly denied it. No, Qingyan doesn't dislike it. It's just that I'm too shocked and can't react." "Humph. Go pick a brush." Xiao Su was already too lazy to look at her inconsistent appearance. He casually pointed at her and let her go to the brush rack to choose. Chu Qingyan gave a soft sigh in her heart. She didn't know what this highness was thinking, always changing his mind. She wanted to learn how to write, but if the person in front of her was changed to this person, she felt that she would be afraid. However, she still accepted her fate and went to pick a brush. At this time, Xiao Su let her pick a brush as he went into the room to change his clothes. He could not tolerate any stains on his clothes. Without the oppressive atmosphere in the room, Chu Qingyan felt the pressure decrease. She slowly picked a brush. On the table, there were all kinds of brushes hanging from the rack. They were all different lengths, thicknesses, and textures. Some were made of bamboo, some were jadeite, and some were jade. They were all sparkling and dazzling. Under the light, they had a faint glow. Chu Qingyan took out a brush made of white jade. It was cool and comfortable to the touch. Chu Qingyan weighed it in her hand and found that it was very light. She had thought that a jade brush would be heavier than a bamboo brush, but it was actually very light. That meant that writing with it would be very comfortable. Ben Wang asked you to choose the brush, not to weigh the money. The unhurried voice penetrated the air and reached her ears, causing her to subconsciously withdraw her fingers. However, the pen made of white jade was too slippery, and it slipped through the gaps between her fingers. Crack! It fell to the ground and broke into two pieces. Chu Qingyan looked at the dismembered brush on the ground and was stunned. Xiao Su slightly raised his brows when he saw this. He stepped over the dismembered brush and sat down in the armchair. Behind him was Hong Yi. When Hong Yi came in, she also saw this scene. Her brows jumped. That was the Lord's favorite brush, but it was broken just like that. Thinking about it, this young miss from the Chu family would be reprimanded by her lord. It was always right to admit one's mistake the moment one did something wrong. So Chu Qingyan immediately lowered her head and admitted her mistake. Sorry, I didn't do it on purpose. If you want to blame someone, you have to take half the responsibility. Who told you to suddenly speak and scare me? Xiao Su did not look at the brush on the ground. He turned to look at her and said, Didn't this king tell you to pick a brush? What are you in a daze for? Could it be that you want to use your hand to replace the brush? Was he going to let it go just like that? Chu Qingyan foolishly turned around and continued to pick a brush. Her brain still hadn't processed what was going on. It wasn't just Chu Qingyan. Even Hong Yi, who was putting down the pastries, couldn't help but be stunned. She never thought that her lord would let her off just like that. She felt that it was a bit inconceivable. You can leave, Xiao Su said indifferently. Hong Yi naturally knew that when Lord was in his study, he didn't like anyone else to attend to him. Even Lan Yi was rarely in his room. He would only summon her in when he had something to do. At this time, Hong Yi glanced at the petite figure with her back to her as she picked a brush. It seemed like Lord really liked having this little girl by his side to serve him. Lan Yi entered the room and nodded at Hong Yi as she passed by. When she saw the broken brush on the ground, she was speechless again. She turned to look at Chu Qingyan, who was obediently picking a brush. She was surprised. This young miss of the Chu clan seemed to really like throwing things on the ground for fun. However, this was also a child's nature. Lan Yi had just picked up a brush when she heard Lord's impatient voice. I told you to pick a brush, not to pick vegetables in the market. What can you do if you dilly-dally? Lan Yi smiled slightly. It was clear that Lord cared about this young miss of the Chu clan. When Chu Qingyan heard this, she felt that she had been wronged. There were at least 10 brushes in front of her. She was dazzled by the number of brushes in front of her, and didn't know where to start. At this time, she could only randomly pick one, and turned to hand it to Xiao Su. Xiao Su raised his brows at her choice. Are you sure? Chu Qingyan looked at the brush in her hand. It was comfortable to hold, and the bristles of the brush were round and conical. It was neither flat nor thin, and there were decorative patterns on it. It looked beautiful, light and beautiful. Of course, she was sure. However, she believed that Xiao Su's words had a hidden meaning. It didn't seem like he had said it casually. However, she really couldn't find a reason to say that this brush wasn't good. Seeing her nod in confusion, Xiao Su didn't say anything else. He took her brush, and then explained the posture of holding the brush. The posture of holding the brush is just these few words. Pen mark hook square block. As he spoke, he held the brush and demonstrated. Actually, she had learned how to use a brush for a year in the modern world. However, she had neglected it for too long, so she was rusty. Moreover, she was just a child who grew up in a poor village. How could she possibly know how to read? So when Xiao Su asked her if she could read, she shook her head. However, when she saw Xiao Su holding the brush, she was reminded of her teacher. It couldn't be compared at all. She had to admit that the cold Xiao Su's posture of holding the brush was very good. It was even more accurate than her teacher's. The first section of the thumb was pressed against the inside of the brush. The joint of the thumb twisted the brush slightly outwards. Using the first joint of the index finger to press against the outside of the brush, and cooperating with the thumb, he grabbed the brush. Using the first and second sections of the middle finger to hook the outside of the brush like a hook. Using the nail of the ring finger to push against the outside of the right side of the brush, he blocked the hook of the middle finger and pushed it outwards. The little finger was pressed against the ring finger, resting under the ring finger, and not touching the brush. The ring finger was weak, so it couldn't push the hook of the middle finger alone. It needed the little finger to support it and add more strength. This was what her teacher had told her. At that time, this simple action, when Xiao Su did it, had a kind of impulse to focus on it. After speaking, Xiao Su threw the brush back to her. Hold the brush. Chapter 46. With her previous foundation, Chu Qingyan didn't find it difficult, but the iceberg teacher reprimanded her. Firm fingers, empty palms, vertical palms, flat wrists, straight pipes. Chu Qingyan blushed with shame. What a strict teacher. The fingers must be strong when holding the brush. The joints must be pointed outwards. And the fingers must be firm but not loose. The 5 fingers must be firm and strong, and it will help you move the brush. However, the tightness must be moderate. If it's too tight, it won't work well. If it's too loose, it won't work well. Chu Qingyan subconsciously increased her strength. Pa! The ruler fell on the back of her hand, instantly leaving a red mark. She felt a burning pain, and couldn't help but raise her teary eyes to glare at the culprit. Xiao Su ignored her glare and continued. Don't shake your fingers. Concentrate. Chu Qingyan gritted her teeth. Compared to the iceberg teacher, she felt that the previous teacher was simply too gentle and kind. The iceberg teacher looked at her hand and continued. Open the web between your thumb and index finger. Chu Qingyan heard this and slightly opened 2 fingers. Unfortunately, the teacher seemed to be somewhat dissatisfied. After a long time, she still couldn't meet his requirements. He slightly frowned. Chu Qingyan thought that he had given up, but she didn't expect to see him call Lonnie in. Bring in a raw egg. Lonnie looked at Chu Qingyan doubtfully, and immediately nodded. Chu Qingyan thought that Xiao Su was hungry, and wanted to have a snack. However, on second thought, it wasn't a cooked egg. After Lonnie served the egg, Xiao Su turned to let her hold it. She had a bad premonition. Sure enough. Wrap the egg in your palm and hold the brush well. If the egg falls, then you can forget about dinner. The iceberg teacher sat on the chair with a leisurely expression, but the words he said made people feel like they were asking for a beating. The cold egg in her hand made Chu Qingyan feel cold all of a sudden. Was this Xiao Su uncomfortable if he didn't torture her? Chu Qingyan had a belly full of anger that she couldn't vent. But after she calmed down, she had to admit that this method was indeed very effective. She could train her pen-holding posture, but her hands would easily get sore, okay? If you want to use all your strength, you must flatten your opponent's wrist and raise his blade. Don't keep your wrist leaning on the table. Pa! The pharaoh fell once again. His fingers didn't hold it tightly, and the egg slipped out of his palm and landed on the table. It bloomed. The golden yellow egg yolk and the transparent viscous liquid instantly spread out on the table. It was like the scorching sun on the horizon, causing one to feel tender affection for it. But at this moment, Chu Qingyan was already stunned, because she realized that she had no fate with tonight's meal. What a pity! An indifferent voice sounded in her ears. It was like he was feeling pity for the egg, but it also sounded like he was feeling pity for her. But in Chu Qingyan's ears, it sounded like it was filled with ridicule. Chu Qingyan looked at the red marks on the back of her hand. She had practiced for 2 hours without rest, so she was now thirsty, tired and hungry. She suddenly felt indignant from the bottom of her heart. She turned her head and looked at the person in front of her with an aggrieved expression. She angrily said, "Why do you always force me to do things I don't like? Unless you can give a reason to convince this king, then this king will not force you to learn to read." Xiao didn't seem to be angered by her words. He still leaned back in his chair and coldly looked at her. Chu Qingyan's eyes lit up. This person was trying to reason with her? She rolled her eyes and then came up with a reason that she felt was watertight. As the saying goes, a woman's virtue is if she has no talent. Kai doesn't need to be very knowledgeable. As long as she knows how to help Lord manage his palace, that's enough. When she finished speaking, she heard a low sneer. This king has never kept useless people by his side. Chu Qingyan was frightened by his tone. It was like a cold wind brushing past her ears, filled with arrogance, indifference, and ridicule. She couldn't help looking at the person in front of her. At this time Xiao slowly looked away. His cold gaze had a trace of indifference as his thin lips slowly opened. "Qingyan, do you think that this king will lack someone to manage his palace? Moreover, she doesn't know anything." These words successfully made Chu Qingyan think of Bai Hu, who was in charge of the front yard, and Hong Yi, who was in charge of the backyard. She couldn't help feeling a bit ashamed. Indeed, he already had these capable left and right hands. Why would he need someone? But she was clearly just being polite, alright? She just wanted him to give her a way out. But this person wasn't reasonable at all. Perhaps it was because his tone was too strong. But the person in front of him turned pale, as if she was frightened by him. Xiao couldn't help feeling a headache coming on. He was used to giving orders, and was used to dealing with strong men. The people around him were also used to his way of doing things. But the person in front of him was different from his ministers, subordinates, and servants. He couldn't use force, but he didn't know how to use force, so he had never felt this defeated before. It seemed like he really didn't have the talent to educate children. He had clearly restrained his strength, but he didn't know if it was because the ruler was too hard, or because her skin was too soft. The back of her hand was already slightly red. Xiao was also speechless. So the two of them looked at each other without saying anything. In the end, Chu Qingyan shook her sore arm, and then silently picked up the brush again. Looking at the stubborn figure with her back to him, Xiao was slightly startled, and then the lines on his cheeks softened. He stood up and walked to her side with the ruler. He lifted her arm slightly, and corrected her standing posture. Only when the palm is upright can it be straight. Only when the palm is straight can it be sharp. Only when the palm is sharp can it be in all directions and move freely. Chu Qingyan nodded slightly, completely accepting his teachings. This training lasted until the sun set in the west. The result of being too focused was that time was like sand between one's fingers, passing without them knowing. Lani came in to inform them that it was time for dinner. Chu Qingyan looked at Xiao and then put down the brush in her hand. At this time, she felt that her right arm didn't belong to her anymore. "Your posture is passable. I'll teach you some simple strokes tomorrow," Xiao said lightly. Chu Qingyan gently nodded like a studious student. The little hedgehog with red eyes from the afternoon could no longer be found on her body. When she saw that Xiao was about to leave, Chu Qingyan lowered her head and rubbed her stomach. "It looks like I'll have to trouble you with the empty fort strategy tonight. What are you still standing there for? Do you want this prince to wait for you to eat?" Xiao turned his head to look at her with a frown. "Ah!" Chu Qingyan's eyes lit up and she immediately followed after him. It looks like this ice block teacher isn't so unreasonable after all. Lani watched as the large and small figures gradually disappeared into the distance, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. It seemed like she had never seen such an interesting scene before. She turned around and entered the study to clean up the pile of broken egg remnants on the table. It seemed that after the Chu clan's 9th young miss entered the study would mysteriously break into some unexpected things. But what was strange was that Lord didn't get angry. This was also very interesting. Chapter 47. When she returned home at night, she didn't even have the strength to take a bath and change her clothes. Chu Qingyan blinked her teary eyes. Why were her experiences during this period of time completely different from what she had imagined? Wasn't Xiao a cold, indifferent, and cold-blooded lord? Shouldn't he be high and mighty, and keep people at arm's length? Shouldn't he be dismissive of her, and throw her to the side without paying attention to her? Why was she ordered around and abused as soon as she entered the prince's mansion? Oh, Chu Qingyan looked up to the sky and howled. Why was all of this so strange that she was at a loss for what to do? At this time Xining, who was wringing the towel while looking at her with a smile, had a joyful look on her face. Master, this servant realized that Lord treats you very well. He simply treats you differently. This servant has been in the prince's mansion for more than half a year. But this servant has never seen Lord take care of anyone like this. Xining, it's not terrible to be uncultured, but it's not good to use idioms indiscriminately. Which eye of yours saw that the King of England treats me differently? Chu Qingyan wanted to roll her eyes. Xining had an innocent look on her face. This servant saw it with both eyes. Besides, this servant is illiterate, so of course I'm uncultured. How can I be as fortunate as Master, who even has Lord personally as your teacher? Chu Qingyan raised her hand and tapped the little girl's forehead, curling her lips into a teasing smile. Am I not very dignified as your master? You actually dare to rebuke me? Xining smiled and waved her hand. How would this servant dare? Master, you're the most important, and the person this servant admires the most. If you point to the east, this servant definitely doesn't dare to go the west. Chu Qingyan shook her head helplessly. After this girl followed her, she simply became more and more lively. Meanwhile, in Yushuang courtyard, Lord, I heard that this 9th young miss of the Chu family knocked over an inkstone today and broke your favorite jade brush. She's too unruly. Chang'e held the clothes and placed them in the wardrobe. She turned and walked to Xiaosu's side, her tone indignant. A haze flashed through her eyes. In the past few days, Lord had actually been so attentive to Chu Qingyan, which made Chang'e feel uncomfortable. This was the first time that she saw the Lord willing to let a woman get close to him. Although she was just a brat, she was still the Lord's wife in name. With the Lord's side, these past few years, Xiao, who was resting with his eyes closed, was indifferent to her words. Has the Wang Fu reached the point where they can't even afford a brush? Chang'e did not think that Lord would actually reply to her like this. Could it be that Chu Qingyan already had a certain position in Lord's heart? Chang'e misspoke. She lowered her head in fear. Although Lord's tone was calm, the pressure he had accumulated over the past few days still made her tremble in fear. Lord disliked people talking nonsense the most. She had accidentally blurted it out today, so she immediately regretted it. You can leave. Xiaosu continued to close his eyes to rest. Chang'e did not know if Lord was displeased by her words, so she retreated in fear. When she walked out of the room, her expression turned to anger. Chu Qingyan, this brat. If she had the chance, she would definitely not let her have an easy time. After Chang'e left, Hualing and Turin walked in. Seeing that their lord's expression was normal, and that he was not affected by the bustling corruption case outside, they couldn't help but feel relaxed. What is it? Xiaosu slightly opened his eyes, his expression lazy and cold. Hualing put away his smile and sternly said, Lord, Wang Chang's family has already been searched, but His Majesty has not yet issued a decree to convict them. His Majesty probably wants to find evidence of Lord's involvement through Wang Chong. But this has nothing to do with Lord. He probably won't be able to find anything. Turin coldly sneered. Xiaosu indifferently raised his brow and propped up his chin with his hand. Seeing that Lord didn't seem to care, Hualing and Turin glanced at each other. Turin worriedly said, Lord, the person in charge of this case is Lin Fengzheng. If he plays any tricks, His Majesty will be even more suspicious of you. Lin Fengzheng was the disciple of Right Minister Fu Jianrong, and Fu Jianrong was Consort Yu's father. Xiaosu indifferently said, Don't act rashly. Perhaps he's waiting for us to panic. The fire spirit and earth spirit felt that their liege's words were very reasonable, but a hint of bitterness appeared on their lips. Their liege had been perfectly fine, but because someone had submitted a memorial accusing their liege of colluding with Wang Chong, His Majesty had ordered their liege to return to his residence and recuperate. His Majesty had said that his liege had been given a special leave to rest because of his great achievements in the conquests of the north and south. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that their liege had been suspected by his Majesty, which was why his authority had been taken away. Seeing that Lord wasn't very interested in this matter, Wuling changed the topic. Lord, I heard that the young lady of the Chu clan caused trouble in the courtyard? As soon as his voice fell, he received a faint glance from his master. Wuling quivered and couldn't help but smile apologetically. Wangya, what are you looking at? It's only been a few days and your ears have grown? Thinking about it, he could tell that Lord was teasing him. Wuling chuckled. As a subordinate, I naturally have to pay attention to my master's every move. Isn't that right, Atu? Turin was very indifferent to Wuling's winking. He turned to his master and hesitantly asked, Master, you seem to treat the 9th young lady of the Chu clan differently. Do you have some plans? Plans? Xiao fell into deep thought, and a cute little face appeared in front of him. He didn't seem to have any plans for her, and was just following his heart. Seeing that his master didn't answer, Turin pursed his lips and couldn't help but call out, Lord? Xiao withdrew his thoughts. I have nothing to do, so I'm just looking for something to do. Wuling couldn't help but laugh. So Lord was just teasing little girls when he had nothing to do. He couldn't help but sympathize with Chu Qingyan. Turin didn't say anything else, but his impression of Chu Qingyan became even worse. He subconsciously felt that the people that his Majesty gave to his master weren't good people. So his dissatisfaction with her always existed. The next day, Chu Qingyan came to report again, because she had to learn how to write. Chu Qingyan deliberately rolled up her sleeves and tied a small knot around each of her wrists to make it easier for her to move. Xiao looked at her nondescript actions and didn't say a word. He turned around and picked up a brush, slowly sketching on the prepared rice paper. This was the first time she saw Xiao write. His black robe was untidy, and his body was tall and slender. His slender fingers poked out of his sleeves to hold the brush. The mask covered his face, so she couldn't see his expression. But from his deep eyes and the way he bent over, she could see that he was calm and relaxed, as well as casual and lazy. His drooping sleeves brushed across the table with the movement of his wrist, as if brushing against her heart, making it itchy. She carefully observed it. It wasn't because he wrote slowly, but because in the quiet study, the air seemed to be stagnant, so his every move seemed to be played in slow motion. It made her a little infatuated. He had never felt that there was someone who could write so beautifully like a painting. When Xiao put down the brush, Chu Qingyan finally came back to her senses. She couldn't help but move over to look at the words he wrote. Chapter 48. Chu Qingyan. That was her name. She was slightly taken aback. This character was elegant and reserved, and the scent of ink was slightly intoxicating. It gave people a comfortable and clear feeling. She never knew that such simple words could be written with such an open mind. Xiao did not know the admiration in her heart. He stretched out his hand and pointed at the paper. He slowly said, Your name. Chu Qingyan subconsciously nodded. To learn how to read, we will start with your name. In this hour, you will first practice these 3 characters. Xiao moved slightly to the side to make room for her. Chu Qingyan nodded again. She held the brush and dipped it in ink. Around the belly of the brush was full and round, and the ink was so thick that it could not dissolve. She had not written with a brush for many years. She did not have confidence in her heart. Her fingers trembled slightly, and a drop of thick ink dripped onto the snow-white paper and spread. Chu Qingyan subconsciously looked at Xiao, who was watching her. Seeing that he did not have any expression, she heaved a sigh of relief. She immediately collected the ink on the inkstone. She had been too anxious just now and had stained it with too much ink. Chu Qingyan only bent down to write after gathering her breath and calming herself down. Every stroke was a little stiff, and there were thin forks everywhere. Chu Qingyan blushed with shame. She had not written for many years, and her writing was indeed not presentable. Fortunately, Xiao did not say anything and allowed her to practice. Chu Qingyan lowered her head to write again. After she had filled 2 pieces of paper, She planned to continue switching fingers. She had just covered a new piece of paper when the golden sunlight under her sleeves suddenly covered a black shadow. Chu Qingyan focused her eyes and saw that it was actually a figure. She was just about to turn around when she saw that the black shadow had completely surrounded her. A cold and fragrant smell of ink instantly hit her in the face. Chu Qingyan immediately froze on the spot. She lowered her head and watched as a slender white hand passed through her waist and grasped the hand that was holding the brush. Then the other hand was casually placed on the table to her left. Chu Qingyan originally thought that a person with such a cold temperament, who emitted a cold aura, would have hands like 1,000-year-old ice. But when his hand covered hers, she only felt warmth, like the warm spring sun. She was slightly stunned. No, how could she be bewitched by beauty? Although she was obsessed with looks, she still had integrity, okay? She should be angry because she was being taken advantage of right now, shouldn't she? Because Chu Qingyan's back was facing Xiao Su, he did not see Chu Qingyan's wonderful mood changes. When his hand wrapped around her small hand, Xiao Su was also stunned for a long time. This was the first time he had held someone's hand. In his 20 years of life, what he had done the most was holding a brush and a sword. They were all cold and silent, but this touch of softness in his hand made him feel a novelty. Her hand was very small, so small that his hand could wrap around it. It was fleshy and her joints were thin and short. It was as if with a gentle grip, he could crush her in his hand. She was very thin and weak, but also very pitiful. Xiao Su's fingers moved slightly, bringing her hand along to spin the brush on the white paper. Chu Qingyan was quickly attracted by his actions. She knew that he wanted to teach her how to write. Her teacher had done this before, and it was a very common thing. But for some reason, when Xiao Su's back covered her body, she felt a little uncomfortable. Focus. A cold voice sounded from beside her, with a trace of displeasure. Chu Qingyan shivered as she could clearly feel the impatience in his voice. Chu Qingyan immediately focused her attention on the paper in front of her. Perhaps she was overthinking it. Xiao Su might only be treating her as a student, and she was being too sensitive. With this thought, her entire body relaxed, and she no longer let her imagination run wild. Feeling the stiff person below him slowly relax, Xiao Su raised his brows. The words you wrote just now were too ugly. If you take it out, it will tarnish this king's reputation. Hearing this, Chu Qingyan secretly stuck out her tongue. Although her writing was ugly, in the eyes of beginners, it was already pretty good, alright? However, she did not forget that the person behind her was a person who pursued perfection. Moreover, as a person in power, he was proud and arrogant. He never cared about the process and only cared about the results. So it was normal that her writing did not enter his eyes. But to be honest, under his guidance, her writing did look a lot better. If it wasn't for her hand being too stiff, the words she wrote would be a bit more elegant than before. After writing a few words with her hand, Xiao Su let go and let her practice on her own. Pay attention to the feeling just now. Move your wrist without moving your arm. When writing horizontally, it should be thick at both ends and thin in the middle. When writing vertically, your fingers should not tremble. Do you think you are drawing a caterpillar? Xiao Su's gentle reprimand had a teasing tone that even he did not notice. His eyes opened, and there was a faint smile in his eyes. Chu Qingyan naturally did not see it. She only felt that this person's requirements were too high. If it was in this world, she was only a beginner. Xiao Su actually had such high requirements for her. Lord, more haste, less speed. Qingyan has only just started learning, so she needs some time to relax. When Xiao Su finished saying that he would teach her the other words later, Chu Qingyan could not take it anymore, and immediately raised her head to refute. Xiao Su did not get angry when he heard this. Instead, he looked at her indifferently. More haste, less speed? You actually know the meaning of this word. That's a good choice. However, have you ever heard of a strict teacher producing a brilliant student? This king is not a very patient person. As long as I am your teacher, I can only obey. Tyrannical, Chu Qingyan muttered when she heard this. How could these soft words escape Xiao Su's ears? Xiao Su slightly hooked his lips. Write 20 pieces of paper today. Otherwise, you'll have to think of something for dinner yourself. Dinner again. Chu Qingyan was depressed. Did she look like someone who only wanted to eat all day? But she seemed to be a little hungry. Chu Qingyan looked at the table. There were still a dozen or so pieces of paper to reach 20 pieces. This was too much of a scam. After successfully seeing Chu Qingyan's deflated expression, Xiao Su was in a good mood. He leaned over and grabbed her hand, helping her write his name stroke by stroke. The reason was that it didn't matter if she didn't know anyone's name, but she couldn't not write his name. Didn't they say that he was tyrannical? Then he would explain it even more vividly. Then he let her practice on her own. Chu Qingyan found it funny. Although she was depressed, she had to admit that Xiao Su's handwriting was really good. He was worthy of being a teacher. However, to be his disciple, one's mental strength had to be very strong. With Xiao Su's guidance from time to time, Chu Qingyan learned quickly. Xiao Su was quite satisfied and asked, "What character do you want to learn?" Chu Qingyan tilted her head and thought carefully. Then she said, "What character does Lord want to teach me?" This inquiring tone made Xiao Su faintly happy. He smiled but did not say anything. Instead, he used his actions to write down those few words. Chu Qingyan originally thought that this was considered flattery, but when she saw those few words, she couldn't help but twitch her mouth. Chapter 49. Master, Xiao Zhuozi has successfully convinced the fourth prince. He will go to the King of England's residence in a few days. A person dressed like a eunuch reported to the person in front of him, while kneeling on the ground. "You did well. Are the other things ready?" A low female voice faintly sounded. In the empty room, it seemed especially gloomy and scary. "Master, don't worry. Everything is going according to plan. Then, this consort will wait for your good news. As you command." The phoenix outlined by golden threads was auspicious. Under the dim palace lamp, a layer of faint light appeared. As the days passed, Chu Qingyan gradually got used to Xiao Su's mood, which was unpredictable and liked to tease her. Although this was her one-sided opinion. Apart from that day when Xiao Su wrote stupid words on the paper, Chu Qingyan's simple life was quite comfortable. The premise was that she was willing to be literate. However, in Chu Qingyan's view, Xiao Su could barely be considered a good teacher. Her dog-like handwriting was already pleasing to the eye. If there was something that was not to her liking, it would be the increasingly impatient and contemptuous expressions of Xiao Su's supporters, especially Qing Yi. However, Chu Qingyan, who pretended to be cute everywhere, still captured the motherly hearts of several head maidservants of Yushuan courtyard, such as Huang Yi and Lu Yi. On this day, Chu Qingyan was still practicing calligraphy alone in the study room. Occasionally, when Xiao Su saw that her posture was not right, or that her handwriting was not good, he would come forward and teach her hand by hand, just like the first time. Chu Qingyan had gradually gotten used to the touch of his skin. She also got over it. Xiao Su only treated her as a half-grown child. As long as she was calm, she would not feel that something was wrong. After Chu Qingyan wrote 2 large characters, a subordinate entered the study room. Then, Xiao Su went out and told her to write well. Chu Qingyan agreed. If it was in the past, she would have been lazy. However, after coming to the ancient times, she knew the importance of mastering a skill. However, she did not have the golden finger in the novel. The female lead's medical skills were excellent, or her martial arts were excellent, or she was full of farming knowledge. She only had the heart of a riceworm. Now she also wanted to learn to write well. At the very least, her calligraphy was the district's second prize, okay? However, Xiao Su's requirements were too high. To him, her handwriting was just crooked dog-like handwriting. She must not be looked down upon by him. Therefore, Chu Qingyan continued to write a few more large characters. When she put down the brush and stood up while rubbing her right wrist, a pair of large black eyes suddenly appeared in front of her. Chu Qingyan was so scared that she backed up a few steps. Only when she hit the window behind her did she stop. She looked up and saw the youth who had suddenly appeared without a sound. He was born as white as jade and cute with red lips and white teeth. His eyelashes were long and curly, and his face was so soft that it looked like water would come out of it with a pinch. He looked very delicate, just like a little Shota. However, his phoenix-like eyes were slightly narrowed, revealing an arrogant and condescending look. "Who are you?" Chu Qingyan rubbed her chest as she spoke with a bit of displeasure. Although the youth in front of her was as beautiful as a flower, she did not miss the disdain and hostility in his eyes. You don't have the qualifications to know who this prince is. His tone was light as he slightly raised his head and looked at her with disdain. He really was a little brat. Although he was a head taller than her and looked older than her, his actions were very childish. A single sentence had already revealed his identity. It looked like he was Xiao Su's brother, the prince of the Sichuan kingdom. But Chu Qingyan was not very interested in the imperial family. She only knew that there was the Sichuan retired emperor, who wanted her to marry into the King of England's palace, the Sichuan emperor who added fuel to the fire, Empress Liang who didn't really like her, and Xiao Su. She did not have the heart to understand the others. Qingyan greets your highness. A wise person submits to circumstances. She could clearly see that the other person was impatient with her, so there was no need to force it. Chu Qingyan did not want to slap a smiling face. This was what Chu Qingyan was thinking. Xiao Ran did not think that his identity would be seen through so quickly, but he was not angry. He turned to Chu Qingyan who was slightly bowing to him. This stinky girl's appearance was very average. She was so short and rude. How could she be the princess consort of his eldest brother? Xiao Ran had a belly full of anger just thinking about it. Stinky girl. What qualifications do you have to be the princess consort of the King of England? You're not even fit to carry my royal brother's shoes. In the palace, he had heard the palace maid's evaluation of Chu Qingyan. It was nothing more than vulgar, and her status was low. At this time, he also looked at the girl in front of him with this kind of desire. Chu Qingyan pulled the corners of her mouth. She did not know how she had offended this prince. The moment he came, he spoke in an unfriendly tone to defend Xiao Su. However, this person was not the emperor who was not anxious, but the eunuch was anxious. Xiao Su did not say anything, so he was being too meddlesome. Reporting to your highness, Qingyan is not a stinky girl. Whether or not I am the princess consort of the King of England is not something that I, Qingyan, can decide. As for carrying His Royal Highness's shoes, there will be someone else who will take responsibility. Your Highness does not need to worry. Also, Qingyan is very curious. Does your Highness live by the sea? Xiao Su was originally very angry. When he heard her last question, he was slightly stunned and had a puzzled expression. What do you mean? You're really meddlesome. Chu Qingyan continued unhurriedly. Xiao Ran was so angry that he stomped his feet. This was the first time that he had been ridiculed and rebutted. He was somewhat flustered and exasperated as he said, Stinky girl. You actually dared to talk back to this prince with your glib tongue. Someone slapped this prince. As soon as his voice fell, two feminine men immediately appeared behind him. At a glance, it was obvious that they were eunuchs. Chu Qingyan did not expect that he would put on a show of full force as soon as he came up. She was stunned for a moment before she was suppressed. Your Highness, although you are the son of the dragon, you can't privately punish me. Moreover, I am still your royal sister-in-law in name. Chu Qingyan straightened her chest and ignored the fear in her heart as she spoke unhurriedly. In her heart, she was wondering where the big ice cube had run off to. Why was there not a single person in the huge Yushuan courtyard? Royal sister-in-law? Xiao Ran felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He had accepted this little girl, who was 2 years younger than him, as his royal sister-in-law. Moreover, she was the princess consort of his royal brother, whom he respected the most. This was simply unacceptable to him. How could this stinky girl in front of him be worthy of his wise and mighty royal brother? Xiao Ran had a bellyful of indignation. It was fine that his royal father and royal grandfather were fooling around, but he had to properly teach this stinky girl, who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth, a lesson. Otherwise, it would not be enough to appease his anger. Give this prince a heavy slap. After causing such a big commotion, there was actually not a single person. Chu Qingyan gradually understood in her heart, and a trace of sadness flashed through her heart. She did not do anything wrong, but it was precisely because the status of the person in front of her was noble and unattainable that the power of life and death was grasped in front of him. This was the power of the ancient times. The upper class was high and mighty, while the common people were as lowly as ants. This kind of feeling was really uncomfortable. Chu Qingyan slightly hooked her lips, revealing a trace of self-mockery. She slowly closed her eyes, waiting for that slap to fall. Chapter 50. Chu Qingyan closed her eyes and waited for a long time, but that slap did not fall. While she was filled with doubt, she heard the sound of the eunuch beside her taking a deep breath. "Royal brother." Xiao Ran's voice was filled with surprise. Chu Qingyan immediately opened her eyes and met those eyes that were like obsidian. Her heart had never been like this before, as a wave of grievance and sadness filled her heart. "Fourth royal brother, you came to my king's palace just to hit my people?" Xiao Su's eyes casually swept over the two eunuchs holding on to Chu Qingyan. The two of them were scared by his ice-cold eyes, and unconsciously let go of Chu Qingyan. The eunuch that was caught by Hualing held onto his wrist, and quickly returned behind Xiao Ran. Chu Qingyan felt that he must have not been gentle, otherwise that white and clean face would not have become even more pale. Chu Qingyan couldn't help walking to Xiao Su's side. She slightly lowered her head, and her eyes were filled with tears. She looked like a little wife, but she did not say anything. These two were brothers, but that did not mean that Xiao Su stopping Xiao Ran from hitting her meant that he would help her vent her anger. Perhaps it was because of his face. If his fiancé was hit, he would not have any face left. So she tactfully stood to the side. If she didn't have so many scruples, she would not have suffered this loss. However, this person was still a child, so she was too embarrassed to argue with others. However, Chu Qingyan subconsciously hoped that Xiao Su would help her vent her anger. But when she realized this, she was a bit surprised. Based on what could Xiao Su blame his brother for her? She really was overestimating herself. "Royal brother, you don't know. This ignorant commoner actually dared to talk back to me. She is simply not putting me in her eyes. I was just teaching her a lesson." When Xiao Ran heard his royal brother speak, he knew that he wanted to protect this stinky girl. He couldn't help feeling angry in his heart. This was the first time he heard his royal brother blame him for an outsider. What kind of demeanor is there to argue with a girl? Besides, as long as she puts this prince in her eyes, that's enough. Xiao Su sat down on the chair. His eyes were indifferent, but they made people feel an invisible pressure. When Xiao Ran heard this, he felt that it was hard to refute his imperial brother's words, but he also felt uncomfortable in his heart. Could it be that his imperial brother didn't want him as his imperial brother after having this stinky girl? Imperial brother, what's so good about this stinky girl? Not only is she ugly, but she also has a bad temper and no manners. She's not worthy of your protection. Xiao Ran glared at the well-behaved Chu Qingyan. In the face of Xiao Ran's childish behavior, the two adults opposite him were very calm. Xiao Su's expression did not change, but Chu Qingyan just rolled her eyes at him. "Fourth imperial brother, could it be that you have an objection to imperial father's imperial edict?" Xiao Su said without any fluctuation in his emotions. Xiao Ran choked. If his words just now were to reach his imperial mother's ears, he might be scolded. When Hualing, who was standing on the side, saw this, he interjected. "Your Highness fourth prince, I heard that Her Highness Consort Yu is quite supportive of the marriage between my lord and Miss Chu. She even tried her best to matchmake them." Hualing's words were joking, but they contained a hint of sarcasm. This made Xiao Ran's face turn pale. He remembered the day the imperial edict was announced, and the smile on his imperial mother's face. He suddenly felt that he did not have the qualifications to stand here and argue with his imperial brother. Xiao Su looked at Hualing, and Hualing immediately shut his mouth and lowered his head. "When this prince came over just now, I saw that your imperial mother sent someone to look for you. It's getting late, so you should return to the palace." Xiao Su said indifferently. Hearing that his imperial mother sent someone to look for him, Xiao Ran was filled with panic. He had snuck out this time, and never thought that he would be discovered this quickly. However, having his beloved imperial brother stolen away, Xiao Ran's heart was still filled with injustice. He fiercely glared at Chu Qingyan. "If it wasn't for imperial brother speaking up for you, this prince definitely wouldn't have let you off." After saying this, Xiao Ran quickly left with his people. When the study returned to its original silence, Xiao Su's eyes fell onto Chu Qingyan, who was obediently lowering her head. Although her small body had become a bit chubby, In his eyes, she was still like a bamboo pole. If Chu Qingyan knew what he was thinking, she would definitely not let him off. She had clearly gained a lot of weight. The next time her parents saw her, they probably wouldn't be able to recognize her, alright? Feeling wronged, his voice was indifferent. Chu Qingyan never thought that he would ask her this. She reflexively raised her head, but when she met his calm eyes, her heart trembled. Those eyes seemed to be able to see through her thoughts. She couldn't help looking away. I don't dare. She didn't dare, not she didn't. It could be seen that her heart was still filled with injustice. Xiao Su couldn't help curling his lips. He raised his hand and gently lifted her up. In the blink of an eye, she was already in his arms like a feather. Chu Qingyan never expected that Xiao Su would suddenly make a move. Before she could even cry out in alarm, her entire body fell into his firm and warm embrace. When she was surrounded by the scent of ink, her mind instantly froze. Feeling the person in his arms stiffen, Xiao Su mistakenly thought that she still cared about Xiao Ran's words. After thinking about it, he couldn't help patting her back and awkwardly comforted her. Fourth Imperial Brother is still a child. He speaks without thinking, so you don't have to take his words to heart. Xiao Su had never comforted anyone before. He had only seen his subordinates take care of children before, so he learned how to coax children. Unfortunately, he only learned the appearance but not the essence. Chu Qingyan's internal organs were almost displaced by this forceful pat. If she hadn't heard Xiao Su's words, she would have mistakenly thought that he was using this method to help his imperial brother vent his anger. Chu Qingyan quickly grabbed Xiao Su's hand. Her eyes were filled with tears as she looked at him pitifully. Lord, I won't take his words to heart. At worst, I'll just avoid the fourth prince when I see him in the future. Xiao Su thought that his comforting words had worked, so he couldn't help taking his hand back. He nodded in satisfaction and said, his personality is like this, but he's not a bad person. If he bullies you in the future, you can just bully him back. He is a noble prince, a golden branch and jade leaves. I'm just a little girl without any power or influence. How could I dare to go against him? Chu Qingyan couldn't help pouting her little mouth as her face filled with depression. Without any power or influence. Then what about this king? Xiao Su's voice was slightly cold. Chu Qingyan heard this and looked at him in surprise. Hearing his tone, it seemed like he wanted to be her backer? Perhaps it was Chu Qingyan's shock that made Xiao Su's expression change. The hand around her waist tightened, and an ice-cold aura filled the study. Hualing rubbed his arms and moved a few steps away without anyone noticing. Master seemed to be angry. He shouldn't have stayed to watch the play. If he wanted to watch, he should have secretly watched. This was a mistake, a mistake. After being with him for a while, Chu Qingyan more or less understood his personality. Seeing that the situation wasn't right, she immediately reached out her hands to hug Xiao Su's neck. Her face was filled with joy. Lord is Qingyan's big backer. This is great. This sudden intimacy made Xiao Su's conditioned reflex to throw a punch at Chu Qingyan. Chapter 51. But when he saw that pair of intimate and innocent eyes in front of him, his tightly clenched fists immediately loosened. It was a habit formed over the years, and he almost threw this child out. Fortunately, he stopped in time. Otherwise, with her small body, she might not be able to withstand his attack. He relaxed his stiff body and supported her waist with one hand to prevent her from falling. Her breath brushed against his nose. He leaned back in his chair and said with a smile that no one noticed, "It's good that you know. Then can I walk sideways like a crab in the future?" Perhaps it was because she had adapted to Xiao Su's closeness to her. Chu Qingyan seemed to have completely accepted her identity as a 10-year-old child. When she was young, her busy parents had left her in the care of her grandparents. Her family was a scholarly family and had a strict upbringing. Although she had a happy childhood, she was often restrained. Her parents were not by her side, and there was no one to act coquettishly with. So she rarely enjoyed the childlike fun that a child should have. Now that Xiao Su was holding her like a child, a long-lost feeling filled her heart, causing her to let down her guard. She couldn't help but hug his neck and pretend to be a tiger. You can, but the prerequisite is that you have to be under this prince's eyes. Revealing her childlike innocence, It made his lips curl into a faint smile. However, the mask covered his expression, so Chu Qingyan couldn't see it clearly. Doesn't that mean that if she left his sight, she would be hacked to death at any moment? Chu Qingyan gulped. Then she should restrain herself well. Otherwise she would lose her life, if she wasn't under his watch. As if sensing her thoughts, Xiao Su couldn't help reaching out to tap her nose and said in amusement, "You have evil intentions but no guts." Chu Qingyan puffed up her cheeks when she heard this and replied in dissatisfaction. "What if I'm not under the Lord's watch? Wouldn't my life be in danger? You're saying that this prince doesn't have the ability to protect you?" Having his ability questioned, Xiao Su's voice was low. Chu Qingyan stuck out her tongue when she heard Jiang Yi's words. She hurriedly replied, "Qingyan is joking. The Lord's martial arts are unrivaled and his position is high. Who would dare to bully me?" Xiao Su couldn't help but reach out and pinch her nose as a form of punishment. Finally, he let her go and let her go play in the courtyard by herself. Chu Qingyan didn't understand why he didn't go with her, but she thought that there was still an hour before dinner. He was the Lord. Even if he was ordered to rest in the mansion, he wouldn't be idle like her. Thus, he leisurely walked towards the main courtyard. As soon as Chu Qingyan left, Xiao Su's face darkened. He summoned the white tiger. The white tiger was originally busy in the front courtyard. When he suddenly heard that the Lord had summoned him, he was puzzled but immediately rushed over. "What instructions does the Lord have for summoning this servant?" The white tiger bowed with a respectful expression. "Who is in charge of Yushuan Courtyard today?" His indifferent tone was unfathomable. Although he was already used to his lord's cold personality, for some reason, White Tiger felt that there was something wrong with the Lord today. But he still hurriedly replied, "It's Min Qing and Min Feng. Take them away and punish them according to the family rules," Xiao Su said indifferently. The moment he said this, White Tiger's body trembled slightly. He didn't understand why the Lord suddenly wanted to punish these two people. Thinking of the commotion in Yushuan Courtyard just now, could it be that the Lord was punishing them for not reporting when the fourth prince entered the courtyard? The White Tiger was stunned on the spot. Xiao Su raised his eyebrows slightly. "Do you have any objections?" "This old servant doesn't dare. I'll do it right away." The White Tiger immediately accepted the order. The punishment of the family law was not a simple punishment. After 80 beatings, even a strong man would lose 3 of his 7 souls. Not long after, mournful begging for mercy came from outside. The beatings came one after another. Xiao Su had been fighting outside for many years, and the people under him were all experts in the army. When he was enforcing the law, he didn't hesitate at all. Gu Rong and Gu Yi, who were standing outside the study, happened to be facing the front courtyard where the punishment was taking place. A trace of surprise appeared in their eyes. Just because the servants didn't immediately report the news of the fourth prince entering Yushuan Courtyard, causing Chu Qingyan to almost be bullied by the fourth prince, the Lord decided to punish these 2 manservants? Gu Rong and Gu Yi were shocked, and suddenly felt a burst of fear towards the people in the room. In fact, the 2 of them had already received the news of the fourth prince's arrival long ago. They also knew the purpose of the fourth prince's visit, so they held the attitude of watching a show. First, they wanted to see what kind of blame Chu Qingyan would receive. After all, the 2 of them were sent by Empress Liang to serve the Lord. Like the Empress, they hoped that the Lord would one day become the crown prince. Then Chu Qingyan, a woman from a poor family with no power and no influence, would have no help to the Lord in his political career. So although they usually saluted Chu Qingyan, it was always perfunctory. Just like this incident with the fourth prince, they were also happy to see it happen. But they didn't expect that the Lord would punish the people in Yushuan Courtyard because of this matter. The meaning of putting the people in the middle of Yushuan Courtyard to punish by the family rules was self-evident. This was killing the chicken to warn the monkey, to give the people in the courtyard a wake-up call. Gu Rong and Gu Yi felt a chill run down their backs. In the study, Hualing heard the shouts outside getting weaker and weaker, then turned to look at the Lord in front of him, who was calmly flipping through the book in his hand. He felt a little curious. He didn't think that the Lord would actually be angry because of Chu Qingyan. Perhaps Hualing's gaze was too naked, But Xiao Su raised his eyebrows and looked at him. Is your skin itchy? At this time, the sound of a military rod suddenly sounded outside. Hualing was so scared that he covered his butt and shook his head again and again. In the main courtyard, Hong Yi and the others also heard the sound of punishment outside, and each of them had different expressions. Cheng Yi's jealous gaze passed through the window and landed on Chu Qingyan inside. She heard that Lan Yi was reprimanded by the Lord because she wasn't in the study to serve. The Lord was clearly venting for that brat from the Chu family. The more she thought about it, the angrier Cheng Yi became. She was just a child who was still wet behind the ears. How could she be treated differently by the Lord? She wouldn't let her continue to be proud. At this time, Huang Yi walked in with 2 plates of pastries. Seeing Chu Qingyan's large eyes looking around the room, she couldn't help but put the plates in front of her with a smile. Ninth young Miss Chu. These are the pastries the 4th prince brought over from the palace. You can try them. They look very delicate, but they definitely won't be as good as the ones big sister Huang makes. Chu Qingyan looked at them and felt that they looked very good. But when she heard that they were pastries sent by Xiao Ran, her heart subconsciously rejected them. She used this opportunity to praise Huang Yi. Huang Yi was very happy when she heard this. She had to try them and see how they couldn't compare to her own. Unable to resist Huang Yi's enthusiasm, Chu Qingyan casually took a piece and put it in her mouth. It melted in her mouth and had a cold taste. It had to be said that the pastries from the palace were all good things. How is it? Huang Yi's eyes widened as she waited for her answer. Chu Qingyan felt that this little girl was too impatient. She was about to answer when she suddenly felt a metallic taste in her throat. Ninth young Miss Chu. In her haze, she heard Huang Yi's panicked scream. Then her eyes turned black as she fell into a bottomless abyss. Chapter 52. Huang Yi watched as she vomited blood and fainted. She was so frightened that she quickly shouted for help. The people outside heard the commotion and immediately rushed in. Huang Yi saw the fainted Chu Qingyan as soon as she entered and jumped in fright. However, she quickly calmed down and immediately ordered people to do things. Some reported to the Lord, some reported to the Lord, some asked for a doctor, 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 some asked for a doctor. When Xiao Su received the news and rushed over, Chu Qingyan was already lying on the bed with an ashen face. He strode over and sat down on the bed. With a silver mask covering his face, it was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. Have you called for an imperial doctor? Hong Yi immediately stood up. I've already sent people to invite the best doctor in the capital. Because the matter was urgent, she did not have the prince's token to go into the palace to invite an imperial doctor. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw Xiao Su glance at Hualing beside him. Hualing understood tacitly and cupped his hands before quickly leaving the room. Hong Yi knew that Hualing had gone to the palace to invite an imperial doctor. She could not help but order the servants to boil water and prepare a cotton cloth for Chu Qingyan to wipe. Xiao Su stood to the side and watched the servants work. There was an expression in his eyes that others could not see clearly. Hong Yi stood by his side and said in a low voice with concern, Lord, don't worry. Ninth Miss Chu is blessed by the heavens. She will definitely be fine. Xiao Su nodded slightly. He turned around and saw the sobbing Huang Yi and coldly asked, what exactly happened? At this time, Huang Yi knelt on the ground in a daze and kowtowed to her lord. Lord, this servant also does not know what happened. At that time, this servant brought the pastries that the 4th prince brought for 9th Miss Chu to eat. I don't know why, but 9th Miss Chu vomited blood after eating one piece. Huang Yi's words frightened everyone present. They all lowered their heads and did not dare to raise them. If what Huang Yi said was true, then if the pastries that the 4th prince brought were not eaten by Chu Qingyan, but by their lord, the consequences would be unthinkable. Xiao Su heard this and looked at the fruit plate that had not been removed from the table. Someone immediately came forward and took a silver needle to test for poison. When it was brought back, the needle had turned black. That person's expression changed. Looking at the depth of the black color, it was not a simple poison. Xiao Su looked at the silver needles displayed by his subordinate in front of him, and the darkness in his eyes deepened. At this time, The imperial physician that Hualing had invited from the palace also arrived. This imperial physician's surname was Chun, and he had been working in the palace for 10 years. He was quite good at reading people's body language. At this moment, when he saw Prince Ying's cold aura and the person lying on the bed, he immediately understood that the pressure of leaving the palace this time was immense. He had long heard of Prince Ying's reputation for being cold-blooded and cruel. Imperial physician Chen trembled as he placed his finger on Chu Qingyan's pulse. His face instantly turned pale, and when he saw the dark circles under Chu Qingyan's eyes, as well as her purplish-red lips, his legs almost gave out. Reporting to the King of England, the devil's snare is extremely poisonous. I'm afraid that this young lady will not live past tonight. Once these words were said, everyone present was stunned. Although many people did not have much knowledge, they had heard of the 6 great poisons that were rumored outside. Heartbreak grass, poison wine, crane red oleander, throat sealing at the sight of blood, devil's snare. Could it be that this lively and cute little girl was going to die just like that? Imperial physician Chen's words made Xiao frown. He subconsciously turned to look at the person lying on the bed. Her usually rosy cheeks were now as pale as paper. Her delicate eyebrows were tightly knitted together, as if she was enduring great pain. From time to time, she would bite her lips and let out a few soft moans. This servant deserves to die. This servant did not take good care of young Lady Chu. Huang Yi immediately kowtowed when she heard this. Her forehead heavily hit the stone floor, and the muffled groan seemed to hit everyone's heart. No one dared to breathe loudly, afraid that the Lord would take out his anger on them and send their heads rolling. Hualing, send ethereal, Xiao Su suddenly said as he reached out to stroke Chu Qingyan's pale face. Hualing jumped in fright and blurted out, Lord, ethereal is in Shannon. It will take at least 3 days to get back. Give him 2 days' time, Xiao Su said emotionlessly. He turned to look at the trembling imperial physician Chun and ordered calmly, no matter what, give this king 2 days to keep her alive. Imperial physician Chen's eyes darkened. At this moment, he was extremely regretful that he was on duty today. Now that the King of England had given the order, and the knife was on his neck, he could only try everything he could. Sure enough, a person's potential was limitless. Imperial physician Chen used all his skills, and finally managed to save her from the gates of hell. But whether he could save her life in the end, no one could say for sure. Hualing also did not stop to send the order to ethereal. In these 2 days, everyone in Yushuang courtyard was suffering unspeakably. Although their lord looked the same as usual, they could feel the temperature around them getting lower and lower. It was clearly almost summer, but they often broke out in cold sweat when facing the lord. Huang Yi had already knelt in the courtyard for nearly 2 days. The lord did not punish her, but she did not dare to get up. Huang Yi felt uncomfortable when she saw this and wanted to advise her, but she heard Cheng Yi's harsh voice ring out. I don't know what kind of good fortune this Chu Qingyan has cultivated to be able to receive such treatment from the Lord. Huang Yi turned to look at her with a serious expression. Cheng Yi, this time is different from the past. You better not be inaccurate with your words. Otherwise you will suffer when the time comes. Cheng Yi pursed her lips in defiance, but she knew that what she said was not without reason. Her eyes glanced towards the room Chu Qingyan was in, her gaze vicious, hoping that Chu Qingyan would die from the poison. Huang Yi did not say anything more and ordered people to send Huang Yi, who had fainted from the sun, back to her room. And in the room, Chu Qingyan, who was being kept alive by imperial physician Chen, was sometimes awake and sometimes asleep. At this time, her eyes were half open, looking at the muslin canopy above her head, a little confused. Hearing movement, Xiao Su put down the book in his hand and got up to walk towards her. You're awake? Chu Qingyan used a lot of effort to turn her head to look at the person standing gracefully in front of her bed. A bad premonition in her heart, and an indescribable pain all over her body made her heart cold. Her lips parted slightly, her voice soft and weak. Lord, will I die? Without her family by her side, although the person in front of her was cold, at least he had been with her for a period of time. The grievances, fear and sadness in her heart, she could not help but pour them out. Xiao Su looked at her silently. Although he did not say anything, he raised his hand to gently stroke her head, as if he was comforting her. Chu Qingyan slightly grinned, thinking that if she did not live, she had to quickly say her last words. Lord, Qingyan is very sad. It was not easy for me to live, and I have not seen this world properly, but fate is not kind to me. If Qingyan dies, please take into account that Qingyan has been obedient these past few days. Help take care of Qingyan's parents. Qingyan is most worried about them in this life. Qingyan does not dare to trouble the Lord, and only hopes that the Lord can make things convenient, and not let them suffer. Cough cough. Shut up, did this prince say that you will die? Xiao Su was annoyed by her last words, which were full of righteousness. When he finished speaking, he did not hear any sound from below. It turned out that she had fainted again. Xiao Su's expression was very ugly. Chapter 53. Just as Imperial Physician Chen was at his wit's end, Hualing hurried into the courtyard with a handsome man. Ethereal greets Lord. The handsome man immediately bowed when he saw Xiao Su. He sized up his lord from head to toe, and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that he was unharmed. He had thought that he had been urgently summoned back, because the lord had been poisoned. He's there. Xiao Su nodded. Ethereal did not dare to stop, and immediately walked over to the bed. But when he saw that the patient he was about to treat was a child, Ethereal was surprised but immediately walked over. The devil's snare poison had already invaded the child's blood, but had been stopped, and had not had time to spread. But now, the poison had started to move again. If he did not do anything, it would invade his lungs. Ethereal did not dare to delay. Someone prepare the bathtub. Hong Yi immediately ordered the servants to do so. Ethereal wrote down the medicine to be soaked in later, and handed it to Hong Yi to get the medicine. Seeing that Ethereal was preparing everything in an orderly manner, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, Gu Rong came in to report that the fourth prince was asking for an audience. Everyone turned to look at their lord. The suspicion that the fourth prince had poisoned the child had been floating in everyone's hearts. Now that he dared to come and ask for an audience, was he not afraid that the lord would be angry? But the fourth prince had liked to stick to the lord's side since he was young. Although the lord was always cold, the fourth prince seemed to become more courageous with every setback. He did not care about how fierce the conflict between the fourth prince's faction and the King of England's faction was. I won't see him, Xiao Su said calmly. Gu Rong immediately accepted the order and left. But not long after, they heard a commotion approaching Yuxian courtyard. Xiao Su was not surprised to see Xiao Ran barging his way in. Gu Rong followed beside him with a face full of self-blame. If the fourth prince were to force his way in, he would not be able to stop him. Xiao Ran, who had originally been furious, had actually dared to stop him from seeing his imperial brother. However, when he saw the person in front of him, Xiao Ran's expression immediately became unnatural. However, when he saw the servant entering and exiting the courtyard with a bag of medicine in his hand, he immediately reacted. He took 2 steps forward and hurriedly explained, Imperial brother, it really wasn't Chindi. How could Chindi harm you? Xiao Su narrowed his eyes and looked at Hualing beside him. After following by Lord's side for so many years, he could naturally guess the meaning of his lord's glance. Hualing also did not expect the news to spread so quickly. He said, this subordinate immediately sealed the news that day. The people in the manor cannot possibly leak it out. However, at this moment, not only did the fourth prince know about it, but there were also rumors among the people that the fourth prince had murdered his own brother. It was likely that there was a mastermind behind all this. Xiao Ran immediately said, does Imperial brother still want to hide this matter from Chindi? If I did not hear the palace servants say it, Chindi would probably still be in the dark. However, Chindi also does not know why those pastries would be poisonous. Chindi has already captured the people in the imperial kitchen and interrogated them one by one. However, no one is suspicious. When he said this, Xiao Ran's face was filled with frustration. Xiao Su looked at the vexed person in front of him. Only he could turn the imperial palace upside down, without angering his imperial brother. Xiao Su's expression did not change as he said, it's fine. You don't need to blame yourself. Imperial brother, you believe that Chindi did not harm you? Xiao Ran was still a 12-year-old youth. The emotions in his heart quickly showed on his face. Xiao Su did not answer. Instead, he waved his hand and said, "It's getting late. Your imperial mother should be worried. Go back." Although his imperial brother did not directly admit it, Xiao Ran could still feel it. Since his imperial brother had already spoken, there was no reason for him to stay any longer. After bidding farewell, he took his leave and returned to the palace with his people. At this moment Turin appeared. He looked at his master beside him with a face full of surprise. "Lord, why didn't you use this opportunity to strike back at Consort you? Recently, Consort you had been causing trouble for Lord quite a bit. Even this corruption case, inexplicably implicating Lord, was due to Consort you adding fuel to the fire behind the scenes." Xiao Su glanced at him. Although his expression was indifferent, it made people feel as if they were under 1,000 pounds of pressure. Turin lowered his head and did not dare to continue speaking. However, in his heart, he felt that it was unfair for his master. For many years, his master had allowed others to bully him, but because of the brotherhood between them, he had never made things difficult for those people. However, after those people tasted the sweetness, they became even more vicious. It was truly too hateful. "Prepare the horse. Ven Wang wants to enter the palace." Xiao Su saw that Chu Qingyan had already begun her treatment. At this time, her life should not be in danger, so he began to walk out. Yes, although Gu Rong and Gu Yi were surprised, they still immediately responded and went to make arrangements. Inside the palace, Empress Liang was resting on a chair with her eyes closed when a palace servant suddenly came to report that the King of England was requesting an audience. Empress Liang immediately opened her eyes. This was the first time he had taken the initiative to enter the palace. Empress Liang couldn't help but wave her hand to let him in. "What wind blew you to Bengong today?" Seeing the person who had come, Empress Liang's tone was harsh as she mocked him. Imperial Mother knows in her heart. Xiao Su stood in the hall and calmly replied. Empress Liang's trusted aide Luo Yun and Luo Gugu, who were standing to the side, thought that His Highness had entered the palace to reminisce with the Empress. However, they did not expect that the two would not get along. Empress Liang's eyebrows jumped. She felt a bit uneasy, but she quickly calmed down. She raised a white jade finger and blew on the flowers on it. A cold smile appeared at the corner of her mouth as she said, "Oh, then Imperial Mother does not know. Sewer, if you have something to say, just say it. Imperial Mother is not an outsider. There is no need to speak in riddles with Imperial Mother." "In that case, I will speak openly." Xiao Su looked steadily at the person in front of him. "Imperial Mother, Chu Qingyan was the one that Imperial Grandfather bestowed the marriage. You don't have to take the trouble to get rid of her." She didn't expect him to be so smart, and quickly realized that the poisoning incident was caused by her. She unconsciously stilled, but her face quickly turned cold and she angrily said, "Sewer, don't disappoint Imperial Mother's painstaking efforts. Right now, you are suspected by your Fuwang of embezzling the treasury silver. You may not be anxious, but Imperial Mother does not have such good composure. With such a good opportunity, we can kill two birds with one stone. We can destroy Xiao Ran's reputation and get rid of Chu Qingyan, that damned girl. Imperial Mother is helping you clear out the obstacles. Is this how you treat Imperial Mother? You came here in the middle of the night just to denounce me?" Facing the agitated and angry Empress Liang, Xiao Su was unmoved. "I will handle Imperial Mother's matter. There is no need for Imperial Mother to worry. Imperial Father is not a muddle-headed person and will give I justice. Moreover, Imperial Mother should clearly see one thing. Even if there is no Chu Qingyan today, there will be Li Qingyan and Zhao Qingyan in the future. Thus, Imperial Mother does not need to take the trouble." "Justice?" Empress Liang sneered. "If your Imperial Father had you in his eyes, why would you be sent out to the border to suffer so much hardship for so many years? If your Imperial Father had you in his eyes, why would he allow someone to impeach you despite knowing that you were wrongly accused? If your Imperial Father had you in his eyes, why would he allow that slut's son to climb over your head? Sewer, after so many years, do you still not understand?" Empress Liang became more and more agitated as she spoke. Her eyes were red and full of hatred. Chapter 54. Aunt Luo hurriedly stepped forward to appease Empress Liang, who was unable to restrain her anger. She turned to look at the King of England, who was standing quietly in the hall. Her tone was full of pity. "Your Highness, Her Majesty the Empress is doing this for your own good. She has worried so much for you all these years." Xiao Su lowered his eyebrows as his gaze fell on the brick in front of him. However, if someone were to look closely, they would discover that his eyes, which were as black as ink, were currently as gloomy as the thick fog on the horizon. Seeing that Xiao Su didn't say anything, Empress Liang thought that he had already compromised. So she leaned on the back of the golden chair and adjusted her breathing. In an instant, she returned to being the high and mighty queen of the harem. She slowly raised her hand to stroke the hem of her 100 birds, paying homage to the phoenix skirt on her knees, and raised her chin. "Sewer." This time Mother Empress painstakingly grasped the fourth prince's weakness. "You should make good use of it. Although you can't push him into the quagmire in one fell swoop, you can also plant a little stain in the hearts of the officials. In the future, you can make good use of it. Don't worry about concubine Yun's concubine." Empress Liang's eyes suddenly flashed with a touch of viciousness. "That Chu Qingyan must die. Otherwise it will attract the attention of the officials." His thin lips were pursed and his head was lowered. He slowly raised his gaze, his eyes without any ripples. "Mother Empress, forgive I for not being able to agree to this matter." "What?" Empress Liang, who was full of plans, was suddenly doused with ice-cold water by his words, and she lost her composure in shock. "Chu Qingyan saved I, and I can't repay kindness with enmity. Therefore, I will protect Chu Qingyan's life. Please don't involve her in these disputes again." Xiao Su said faintly, his tone firm, as if no one could refute it. "Hehe, so what if she saved you? Above the imperial power, who didn't step on bloody skulls step by step to reach the top? An insignificant life like an ant. Wouldn't it be at your mercy? Besides, no one in this world can cure the devil's snare poison. You'd better not waste your efforts." Empress Liang angrily looked at her stubborn son in front of her. She wished she could tear open his brain and see what he was thinking. Why was she always going against her? Xiao Su felt that it would be pointless to continue talking with her, so he said with an indifferent expression, "Imperial Mother, I have already grown up. I have my own path to walk, so there's no need for Imperial Mother to worry about me. It's already late, so I won't disturb Imperial Mother's rest. I will take my leave." Empress Liang still wanted to say something, but Xiao Su didn't wait for her to speak. He turned around and left with large strides. At this time, a palace servant entered the hall with a secret report in his hand. Seeing the Empress's expression, he didn't dare to say anything and directly handed it to Aunt Luo. Aunt Luo opened the letter and said to Empress Liang, "Nyang Nyang, the informant in His Highness Fu sent a letter." "What did he say?" Empress Liang was so angry that her chest was heaving up and down. When she heard the letter, she thought that it was about Chu Qingyan's death. Joy flashed through her eyes. When Aunt Luo saw the contents, her eyes widened. "Nyang Nyang, Chu Qingyan was saved." Empress Liang's breath was stuck in her throat. She grabbed a teacup and smashed it on the ground. She worked so hard and painstakingly planned for him, but what she got in return was his disdain. She wanted Chu Qingyan to die, but he insisted on saving her. The Liang family's future, as well as her bright future, all depended on him. But he never took it to heart and allowed others to humiliate her. He could endure it, but she couldn't tolerate that slut riding roughshod over her. Unwillingness, anger, resentment, they all surged in her heart. Her eyes were red and her fingers clasped the armrest, her veins popping. She swore that she would sit in that position and make that slut's life a living hell. One by one, she would repay the sufferings and pain of the past 20 years. The crisp cracking sound behind him gradually disappeared in the dark night as he moved forward. At the end of May, early June, summer was coming. When he passed by the Imperial Garden, he could still hear 1 or 2 frogs croaking. But he didn't know why, but he felt a trace of coldness. He looked up and saw the palace lanterns in front of him winding along the long corridor. The dim yellow light fell on the bluestone, but in his eyes it was misty. There was a road in front, but it seemed that there was no road. Suddenly, he missed the smiling face in the palace. The palace was too cold. For the first time, he couldn't wait to return to the palace. His swaying voice suddenly tightened. He strode closer and closer to the palace gate. In the King of England's palace, Ethereal wiped the sweat from his forehead. His clothes were wet, as if he had just been fished out of the water. In fact, he had just gone to fight with the King of Hell. Fortunately, he had won the battle. Otherwise he didn't know how to explain it to his master. He turned his head to look at the pale-faced Chu Qingyan, who was already out of danger. He couldn't help being puzzled. He was staying in Shannon, but Chu Qingyan was urgently called over by Hualing to save this little girl. Although he knew that the Lord had been bestowed a marriage by the Emperor, he had never taken Chu Qingyan seriously. How could a weak and powerful woman be worthy of their master? But when he learned that it was his master who gave the order, he was shocked. He carefully looked at the person. He was clearly a child and he couldn't see his beauty. When he examined him, he found that this child had suffered a lot in his early years. His body was thin and weak, and his blood was lacking. Fortunately, he had been recuperated in the palace, so he was slightly better. But this time, the poison had entered his body, so it would take a while for his body to recover. There was clearly nothing outstanding about him. So why did his master treat him differently? So Ethereal couldn't help turning his gaze to Hualing, who let out a sigh of relief. Hualing met his gaze and couldn't help waving his hand. I know what you want to ask, but I really don't know how to answer this question. I can only say that the girl inside saved the Lord once. That was before we returned to the capital. Ethereal rolled his eyes at him. It's a pity that you're still following by your master's side. You're simply wasting your eyes. Hualing choked on his words and coldly snorted. Do you think it's that easy for us subordinates to guess master's thoughts? You're too naive. The night wind blew over and blew Ethereal's clothes dry. He flicked his sleeves and placed them behind his back. The night wind blew up his clothes and his white clothes fluttered, giving him a celestial feeling. Hualing unhappily looked away. Ever since he was young, he hated this celestial appearance of his the most. Ethereal did not care about Hualing's coldness. He threw down a sentence, "If the Lord needs anything, call me." Then he floated away. He had been on horseback for the past few days, and hadn't closed his eyes for 3 days and 3 nights. Now that he was completely relaxed, he felt like his entire body didn't belong to him anymore. He was a doctor who was obsessed with cleanliness, so enduring these past few days was already his limit. Now that his entire body was sticky, he wished he could immediately take a bath. Hualing stared at the sleeve that was about to fly up. He ridiculed in his heart, truly an embroidered pillow. Chapter 55. By the time Xiao Su returned to the king's palace, it was already halfway through the night. He slowly walked into the room where Chu Qingyan was placed. Ethereal had already rushed over after receiving the news and was following him to report the situation. Master, this subordinate has already cleaned the poison from the young miss of the Chu family. There isn't much of a problem right now, but her body's foundation isn't very good. The poison this time may have damaged her foundation, and she needs to rest for a while. Kong Ling noticed that when he mentioned that Chu Qingyan's foundation was not good, and that she had injured her foundation, his master's expression did not look too good. Kong Ling thought to himself, it seems like my master is still paying attention to this Chu Qingyan. You shouldn't return to Shannan for a while. If you need any medicine, just tell the White Tiger. Xiao Su left this order. Then he turned around and entered the room. Ethereal's footsteps paused as he looked at his master in disbelief. Chu Qingyan's body could be given to a normal doctor, or an imperial doctor. Wasn't it a bit overkill to have him stay here to take care of this girl? But when he heard the second half of the order, he raised an eyebrow. His master wanted to take care of her body at all costs. When Xining, who was serving Chu Qingyan, saw someone come in, she quickly opened the curtain for Xiao Su. She didn't think that Lord would come in at this time. Lord. Xining was just about to bow, when she was stopped by a look from Xiao Su. He waved his hand. Xining understood and left. Soon, he was the only one left in the room. Ethereal also received his order and left. There was a lamp in the room, but in order to take care of the sleeping Chu Qingyan, it was moved far away. The moonlight coming in from the window couldn't compare to it. Xiao Su used this silver moonlight to look at the person on the bed. Although the devil's snare had been removed, her face was still pale. Thinking back to the first time he saw her, her red face was very cute. He sat down on the bed, his gaze still on her body. Although she looked timid, she was actually very bold. Normally, she was like a little kitten that hid its claws. When she couldn't take it anymore, she would show her claws. For example, that time when he had teased her to the point of no return, she had angrily come to him to settle accounts. Thinking of her wonderful face at the time, Xiao Su couldn't help raising the corner of his lips. Thinking of the times he teased her, his heart gradually calmed down. The pursuit of fame and fortune, the schemes of mutual deception, the broken voice, the angry scolding, and the cold indifference in the depths of his memory seemed to be far away. Xiao Su leaned against the wall of the bed and looked at the person sleeping peacefully. He felt an indescribable sense of peace. Time passed quickly and the night was over. And, seeing Lord leave, Xining finally let go of her fear and entered the room. After a while, Chu Qingyan slowly opened her eyes. When her eyes adjusted to the light in front of her, her muddled mind gradually became clear. Water. She opened her mouth but it was dry. When Xining heard her voice, she immediately held a cup of water and slowly brought it to her mouth, feeding her little by little. When her throat felt better, Chu Qingyan shook her head. She wanted to raise her hand to support her forehead, but she found that her body was weak, and she didn't even have the strength to raise her hand. Chu Qingyan was startled. At this time, the forgotten memories came back to her. She remembered the black blood before she fainted, and couldn't help being surprised. Xining, what happened to me? Seeing her mistress alive and well in front of her eyes, the tears that Xining had been holding back for 3 days finally flowed out. She cried, "Mistress, you were poisoned a few days ago after eating the pastries brought by the fourth prince." A few days ago? Chu Qingyan frowned. Yes, you were unconscious for 3 days. Fortunately, Lord brought a highly skilled doctor, otherwise the poison of the devil's snare. Xining cried and didn't continue. Devil's snare? She often heard about it in TV dramas, but she didn't expect it to happen to her. Chu Qingyan sucked in a breath. It seems that she and the fourth prince obviously didn't get along well. Eating his food, she was almost poisoned to death. Fortunately, the King of England saw that she was his fiancée and saved her life. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but have a headache. She seemed to owe the King of England a big favor. Forget it. She'll pay it back when she has the chance in the future. Xining, I'm a little hungry. She hadn't eaten for 3 days and had been relying on those medicinal decoctions, so her stomach was already empty. Xining originally wanted to tell her master that Lord had accompanied her for the entire night, but her master interrupted her. Her attention was immediately focused on the matter of her being hungry, so she hurriedly nodded. In the study, Xiao Su sat quietly, his 2 capable subordinates, Hualing and Turin, standing in front of him. Turin reported, Lord, today, Wang Chang's family has been convicted, and 9 generations of his family will be executed after autumn. Lin Fengzheng has found many people who are related to him in the past 2 days, and they have all been imprisoned. This corruption case could be considered to have come to an end. Although Hualing was happy that his lord had been cleared of suspicion, he also felt that it was strange. Lord, you said that this matter had been dragging on for a long time, and that Lin Fengzheng was also racking his brains to find a reliable crime to frame you. How did the case end so quickly? Do you think there's something strange about this? Turin coldly chuckled. Isn't it because the Fu clan was loyal to the Lord for the sake of the fourth prince? With Turin's reminder, Hualing instantly understood. Chu Qingyan had been poisoned by the fourth prince's pastries. Although the Lord had sealed the news, the Empress had still used some means to privately spread the news. The Fu clan, or perhaps it would be better to say that Consort Yu was worried that Xiao Su would use this opportunity to retaliate, so they were the first to react and quickly put an end to the corruption case, no longer spending time trying to frame the Lord. This could be considered doing Lord a favor, because on the surface, it was His Majesty who wanted to investigate Lord, not them. Although they had only added fuel to the fire, these wily old foxes would never admit to it. At this time White Tiger walked in. Lord, His Majesty sent people to deliver many precious herbs and silk, saying that it was a reward for the Chu clan's young miss. The accompanying eunuch told this old servant to pass on the message that the cooks in the imperial kitchen, who made the pastries that day, have already been punished. Xiao nodded indifferently. For the Fu clan, Imperial Father's actions were not just to appease him, but also to keep the peace. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, revealing a smile that was not a smile. Guoling and Turin's expressions changed. They could tell what His Majesty meant. He was telling Lord not to pursue the fourth prince's mistakes. They all looked at their master in front of them. Right now their master was probably feeling terrible. His Majesty favored the fourth prince too much. Xiao inadvertently saw a figure outside the window and waved his hand to call her in. Chapter 56. The person who passed by was none other than Xining, who was preparing food for Chu Qingyan. Wang Lord, do you have any orders? Xining stammered as she was intimidated by Xiao's powerful aura. Xining's hand was trembling, and the lid of the bowl was knocked up and down. Xiao frowned as he looked at the bowl of porridge. Your mistress is awake? Xining immediately replied. Mistress has just woken up. This servant was just about to deliver this bowl of porridge to mistress. Xiao said, let's go. Xining didn't know what Lord meant. Fortunately, she was quick-witted and immediately followed him. After turning left and right, they quickly arrived at the room. Chu Qingyan was originally resting with her eyes closed. When she heard the noise, she calculated the time and guessed that Xining had returned. She opened her eyes with great effort. Unexpectedly, the first thing that came into view was the corner of a black robe. She was slightly stunned. A clear and cold voice like jade and stone sounded softly in her ear. Awake! This familiar voice startled her for a moment. These few days, she was unconscious and muddle-headed. She felt that her life was like duckweed rising and falling. If that voice hadn't suddenly pulled her up when she was about to sink, she might have fallen into a deep sleep and never see the light again. Yes, Chu Qingyan replied softly. She hadn't spoken for a few days, and her voice was hoarse beyond recognition. Xiao couldn't help but frown when he heard this, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at Xining. Xining suddenly received Lord's gaze indirectly. She subconsciously trembled, then understood his meaning. She quickly carried the bowl of porridge to her mistress. After helping her mistress to lean against the bed, she carefully opened the lid of the cup and scooped a spoonful for her mistress. Perhaps it was because the Lord was staring at her from the side. Xining's heart was filled with fear, causing her hand that was holding the spoon to tremble. Before the porridge reached her master's lips, a lot of it had spilled. Xining wanted to cry but had no tears. However, the fear of the Lord in her bones made her unable to restrain herself, even if she wanted to. Chu Qingyan also felt that something was wrong with Ao Xining. Just as she was about to raise her hand and eat it herself, someone who was emitting a cold aura said, "You can leave first." Xining felt as if she had been pardoned. She immediately put down the porridge and turned to leave. Before she left, she threw a tearful look at her mistress. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. If you think it's not good enough to keep me here, then don't run away so quickly. The sound of a chair rubbing against the ground was heard. Chu Qingyan looked over in confusion, but what she saw made her horrified. The high and mighty King of England actually picked up the bowl of porridge and sat beside her. It seemed that he was going to take over the task of Xining, but she had never dared to think about this scene. Such a down-to-earth lord. The scene was too beautiful for her to look at, because she would think that she was hallucinating. But the hallucination soon became reality. That spoonful of scalding porridge was forcefully shoved into her mouth. Chu Qingyan felt that it was really scalding. Originally, she had been tortured by the strong poison this time. Only her mouth could move. Chu Qingyan couldn't stand the hot porridge and spat it out. But as soon as she spat it out, Chu Qingyan regretted it. The person in front of her was the noble lord. It was already a great honor for him to give up his identity to take care of her. But he was met with such a reaction from her. He would probably leave in a huff. Thinking of this, She couldn't help but steal a glance at the person in front of her. Sure enough, Xiao Su's face was already showing signs of darkening. Chu Qingyan's heart was filled with grief. She hurriedly explained, "I didn't do it on purpose. It was too hot." Only then did Xiao Su notice her slightly red and swollen lips. It was probably because she was scalded just now. His expression softened a little, and then he stared at the porridge in his hand, as if waiting for it to cool down. He could wait, but her stomach couldn't. She couldn't help but purse her lips and suggest, "You can blow on it." Xiao Su glanced at her with his deep eyes. Chu Qingyan silently explained in her heart, "This king put down his status to take care of you. And you actually dare to criticize me?" Chu Qingyan blushed with shame at her wild imagination. Although Xiao Su didn't say anything, he really did as she said. He placed the porridge in front of her and blew on it before handing it to Chu Qingyan. But good times didn't last long. His Royal Highness, who had no experience in taking care of people, either didn't control his strength well, or scooped the porridge too full. If Chu Qingyan didn't knock her teeth out, then she almost choked to death. Before she finished feeding him half of the porridge, Chu Qingyan felt that she had already been tormented quite badly. She was afraid that if she continued like this, even if she didn't die from the devil's snare, half of her life would be gone. In order to save her less than half life, she felt that she needed to express her opinion to him. Lord Qingyan should do it herself. Saying this, she raised her hand to take the spoon in his hand. Xiao Su's hand slightly moved away, as he looked at her with cold eyes. "Are you sure you still have the strength?" Chu Qingyan choked, and at this moment, her hand went limp. "If you have the strength to speak, why don't you save the strength to eat?" Saying this, he stuffed a big mouthful of porridge into her mouth. Chu Qingyan looked at the big spoonful in front of her with teary eyes, and she suddenly had the thought of dying. After 81 tribulations, this small bowl of porridge took an entire hour to feed, and the person who should have eaten her fill and had the strength seemed to have experienced an abyss of suffering. Her whole body went limp on the bed, gasping for air. When she saw Xiao Su take back his hand, she almost shed tears of gratitude. She finally finished eating. It was simply a disaster, okay? Perhaps her lips were already broken. As if he didn't feel Chu Qingyan's expression of escaping from disaster, Xiao Su looked at the empty bowl with satisfaction, then put down the bowl and got up. He said to Chu Qingyan, "Have a good rest. If you need anything, let the maid serving you tell Hong Yi." Chu Qingyan hurriedly nodded, wishing that she could immediately send this great deity away. Perhaps because he was in a good mood, Xiao Su didn't notice her abnormality. If it was any other time, he would definitely tease her a bit, call for the servants to serve her, and then leave in large strides. Xining was summoned into the room. Looking at her master on the bed, who looked like she wanted to swallow her whole, Xining bashfully smiled. "Master, are you still feeling unwell?" "My heart doesn't feel well." After Xiao Su left, Chu Qingyan immediately showed her true colors and rolled her eyes at her. "You have the nerve to run away at the last minute, leaving me to face His Highness alone? Lord's aura is too strong, this servant can't stand it." Ever since she followed Master, Xining also learned a few words of English. Chu Qingyan coldly snorted. In fact, she was also clear that other people were afraid of Xiao Su. She couldn't help but wave her hand and let this little girl go. She was just joking with her. Perhaps to other people, to be able to receive the care of the King of England was a blessing from their previous life. But to her, it was a bit bad. Instead, she hoped that Xiao Su would be acting on a whim and not condescending in the future. She couldn't afford it. Otherwise, this little life of hers wouldn't be enough for her to torment. Chu Qingyan guessed correctly. The first time, it was Xiao Su acting on a whim, but in the future, it wouldn't be as simple as a whim. Chapter 57. So for the next few days, Chu Qingyan began to suffer unspeakably. This princing seemed to be addicted to feeding her. Every day, he would report to her bedside at mealtime. Every time the kitchen prepared medicinal cuisine, he would take it away. Then he would sit in front of the bed with his back straight and feed her methodically. To be honest, although Xiao Su's face was covered by a mask and his appearance couldn't be seen, and he was emitting an unapproachable aura, If one only looked at his appearance, they would find him very pleasing to the eye. But being pleasing to the eye couldn't be used as food. For the past few days, Chu Qingyan had been eating sausages in her mouth. She even felt like dying. But facing this great Buddha, she couldn't resist even if she wanted to. So on this day, Chu Qingyan watched with watery eyes as Xiao Su sat down again, with a bowl of medicinal congee. Chu Qingyan felt that she had to do something. Lord, it's already been 3 days. Qingyan's body is much better now. Lord is busy with official matters, so you don't need to worry about taking care of Qingyan. Seeing her anxiously looking at him, Xiao Su raised his brows and muttered to himself. Imperial father excused this king from morning court for the next few days, and told this king to take good care of you. Your recovery is this king's official matter, so it's perfectly justifiable. Chu Qingyan couldn't help complaining about the Sichuan emperor, that she had never met before. He was too meddlesome. Although she felt that she was being unreasonable, she still couldn't forgive the Sichuan emperor. If it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have suffered such an undeserved disaster. Open your mouth. Xiao Su saw her tightly shut lips and said impatiently. Chu Qingyan subconsciously opened her mouth, and a large mouthful of medicinal congee was stuffed into her mouth. She didn't have time to react before she choked. The medicinal congee that had just entered her mouth sprayed all over the bed. Even Xiao Su's body was not spared. Cough, cough, I didn't do it on purpose. Chu Qingyan coughed until her face turned red. She was about to cough her lungs out. Xiao Su frowned and patted her back. However, a man's strength was incomparable to a woman's strength. Moreover, Xiao Su spent most of his time in the military camp, and rarely came into contact with women. He also didn't know how to take care of people, so the way he patted her back wasn't very gentle. As a result, Chu Qingyan's internal organs were almost knocked out by him. So softer, softer. Chu Qingyan was about to cry. Xiao Su couldn't help but stop when he felt her trembling. His brows were tinged with a thin layer of anger. He waited for her to catch her breath before speaking. Do you think that this prince doesn't know how to take care of people? Chu Qingyan wanted to nod, but she waved her hand against her will. Why would I? Qingyan feels that Lord is omnipotent. To be able to receive Lord's care, it is Qingyan's good fortune from her previous life. Perhaps it was because Chu Qingyan's words were too exaggerated and perfunctory, but Xiao Su only glanced at her before flicking his sleeves and leaving. Chu Qingyan rubbed her chest and finally managed to relax. When she looked up, she saw the corner of Xiao Su's clothes disappear at the door. She couldn't help being confused. Why did His Royal Highness just leave without saying goodbye? But no matter how she guessed, she could never guess that a certain person had flicked his sleeves and left because he was angry from embarrassment. After leaving the room, Xiao Su turned and walked into the study. At this time, he had an unhappy expression on his face. When Hualing came in at this time and saw his master covered in rice grains, he couldn't help being shocked. Lord was famous for being obsessed with cleanliness, so how could he allow these things to stain his body today? It really was like the sun was rising from the west. Hualing, what do you think is lacking in this king? Xiao Su asked with narrowed eyes as he pulled him in. Hualing had just looked away from the rice grains on Lord's body, but when he heard Lord's strange question, he was even more shocked. Could it be that the sun wasn't rising from the west today, but rather that Lord was possessed? Seeing Hualing look like he had eaten a fly, Xiao Su immediately regretted asking this question. But words that had been said were like water that had been spilled, so it was hard to take them back. Seeing Lord's expression become ugly, Hualing quickly replied, Lord is wise and powerful. His martial arts are unparalleled. He is outstanding and talented. This subordinate only sees Lord's good points. If there is anything lacking, it would be that there is nothing lacking. Hearing Hualing's glib praise, Xiao Su's expression sunk even more. But some people think that this king doesn't know how to take care of people. Hualing immediately reacted. Lord's abnormality must be related to the Chu family's young miss. Hualing was puzzled. That person had just entered the palace not long ago, but she was able to affect Lord's mood. It really was impressive. However, although Lord was his master, Hualing couldn't help but complain. Every time he saw Lord feed Chu Qingyan, He felt like it wasn't a gift, but a punishment. Thinking of how Chu Qingyan was still recovering, Hualing couldn't help but say a few words for her. Lord, as the saying goes, there are specializations. Your strength lies in the overall situation. Leading troops into battle, being diligent in caring for the people, and taking care of people is not something you need to do personally. Xiao Su stared at this insincere subordinate, and already had an answer in his heart. Hualing felt goosebumps all over his body from being stared at like this, and complained in his heart. Summon all the generals that came with the army for this king. What? Lord's rhythm was jumping a bit too fast, and he actually couldn't keep up. So in the closed study, there were 4 or 5 long tables that were filled with Xiao Su's subordinates that were fighting outside. In front of them were brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones. Xiao Su stood behind the main table and looked down at everyone with his hands behind his back. You have all followed this king for at least 3 years. Whether it was the Battle of Gonluan or the crossing of wood and water, you have all never left this king. This king has placed a difficult problem in front of me and hopes that everyone can help me. For Lord, we will not hesitate to go through fire and water. If you have any orders, please tell us. Everyone cupped their hands and spoke in a loud voice. So everyone that was filled with confidence heard this difficult problem. How were they supposed to take care of a child that was still half grown? The subordinates all picked up their brushes and looked at each other, but they didn't know what to do. General A. Lord, this humble servant is only a martial artist. This kind of thing should be left to the civil servants. Just now, you will not hesitate to go through fire and water? Xiao Su looked over and General A immediately lowered his head. He bit his brush and scratched his head. General B. Lord, this humble servant is good at giving advice in politics. This matter is a bit hard for this humble servant to do. Who was it that said to tell us anything? Xiao Su revealed a faint smile, but everyone could hear the threat in his words. General B immediately dipped his brush in ink and began to write. Seeing that everyone was writing at a high speed, Xiao Su sat down calmly and closed his eyes to rest. The fire spirit servant stood on the side and took a deep breath. So the urgent matter that Lord said he had to discuss was for this matter? This was too inconceivable. If Turin and the others were here, their eyes would probably fall out of their sockets. Everyone racked their brains and wrote until they were dizzy. The answers that they handed in were all placed in front of Xiao Su. Parenting scripture. On the way of being a father, Xiao Su flipped through them one by one while the fire spirit servant secretly watched from the side. The more he looked, the more his eyes couldn't help twitching. All the content could be summed up in 3 words. Pet, pet, pet. She had long wanted some candied fruit, but because Xiao Su was here, she didn't dare to ask. Now that he had taken the initiative to consider it for her, she was very pleased. Seeing her unable to contain her joy, Xiao Su's lips curled into a satisfied smile. He would reward the general, who gave the suggestion later. Picking up the bowl, Xiao Su didn't put it in her mouth like usual. He slowly blew on it, and then brought it to her mouth. Chu Qingyan thought that he would abuse her like usual, but she never thought that he would be much gentler this time. Although she was suspicious of his change, she couldn't resist her hunger, and began to eat in small bites. Seeing that she was eating obediently and didn't pester him to eat as she usually did, Xiao Su smiled again. He planned to give the rare saber that he had just received to the general, who had told him to be gentle with children. Xiao Su looked at the furry head in front of him, and his heart filled with a sense of accomplishment. This was different from winning a battle. This feeling was like an empty teacup being filled with warm tea. It was very comfortable. There's no rush. Eat slowly, Xiao Su said with a rare good temper. After finishing the bowl of rice, other than the feeling that Xiao Su gave her today, Chu Qingyan ate so happily after being poisoned for the first time. Xining put away the empty bowl, leaving only the 2 of them in the room. Because Xiao Su didn't like having too many servants in a room. Even in Chu Qingyan's room, the 2 of them stared at each other. What are you thinking about? Xiao Su looked at the pair of black, grape-like eyes in front of him, and spoke to break the silence between the 2 of them. At this time, Chu Qingyan, who was holding the candied fruit and gorging herself, felt that Xiao Su had given her too many surprises tonight. First, he prepared the candied fruit, then he fed her gently, and finally he asked her what she was thinking. Tonight, Xiao Su was really too unimaginable. However, the person in front of her was still waiting for her answer. So Chu Qingyan braced herself and looked at him. Lord, do you want to hear the truth or a lie? What do you think? Xiao Su raised his eyebrows high. Perhaps it was because she was full and had a rare happy meal. But Chu Qingyan's mind was in a daze, and she didn't notice Xiao Su's expression. After taking a bite of the candied fruit, she blurted out, Lord, to be honest, you're very strange today. Did something trigger you? Otherwise, why are you so good to Qingyan? Xiao Su's face darkened. Chu Qingyan took another bite of the candied fruit and continued to chatter. Lord, do you have something on your mind? Or is there something that can't be solved? Or is there something that you want Qingyan to do? Just say it. As long as it's something that Qingyan can do, I definitely won't refuse. Did she think that he was only good to her because he wanted to curry favor with her? Didn't she look at her small arms and legs? Even if there was something, how could she help? Xiao Su's face was already as dark as the bottom of a pot. It was just that she couldn't see it because it was covered by the mask. Otherwise, how could she have the guts to pluck the fur from the tiger's head? He decided that he would sneak to the border for that aide, who was good at listening to the children's thoughts. Thinking about how Xiao Su didn't lose control of his strength to feed her like before, Chu Qingyan was faintly worried. She didn't forget to put another candied fruit into her mouth. Lord, are you sick? Is that why you don't have any strength? Do you want me to get a doctor to take a look? She thought about the doctor who appeared in front of her these 2 days. Although he was very cold to her, and the medicine he prescribed was very bitter, she heard that he was the one who saved her from the gates of hell. So his medical skills should be good. Thus she kindly suggested, Lord, do you want ethereal to take Lord's pulse? The veins on Xiao Su's forehead bulged, and the corners of his eyes twitched. After muttering for a long time, Chu Qingyan finally remembered that the other party didn't seem to have responded to her until now. With the candied fruit in her mouth, she looked up at him in confusion. Lord, why aren't you saying anything? Xiao Su stood up abruptly, then flung his sleeves and left. Chu Qingyan patted her chest at his back. She was scared to death. This was Lord's true side, okay? Don't pretend to be a good person. Although he was still a good person with a cold aura, she still felt that domineering words were suitable for this cold lord. The 7th rule of parenting: don't lose your temper at your child. Thus, in order to control his emotions that were about to explode, Xiao Su chose to ignore her. Chapter 59. After Xiao Su left, Huang Yi came in with a plate of melons and fruits. Seeing Huang Yi, Chu Qingyan was in a good mood as she greeted her. Older sister Huang, the candied plums you made are really delicious. She had a cute smile on her face. Huang Yi pursed her lips into a smile. Previously, she thought that she would blame her for poisoning her, and was prepared to be punished. But she didn't expect that she would still treat her with a smile. Huang Yi felt that this child was more tolerant and magnanimous, so she treated her more attentively. This is this servant's duty. Huang Yi handed the plate of fruits in front of her. Chu Qingyan had already seen the red and purple bayberries that she was holding, and was drooling with desire. Seeing this, she didn't hold back, and took one and put it in her mouth. It was so sweet that it made people feel happy. Older sister Huang, you treat Qingyan just right. Thinking of the candied plums from before, Chu Qingyan thanked her with a smile. Huang Yi smiled as she shook her head. Lord specially ordered this servant to prepare those. Even these bayberries were just sent up by the servants. Lord took a look at them, and had this servant send them here to satisfy your craving. Huang Yi thought of the cold air emitted from her master's body when he came out of this room. She guessed that this Chu family's young miss might have angered him. But when he heard older sister Hong's report, he didn't even think about it, and had her send the bayberries over. The way these two masters interacted really made people very curious. The bayberries that had just entered her mouth got stuck in her throat, and she almost couldn't breathe. Huang Yi was so scared that she immediately went forward to pat her back. Only then did Chu Qingyan forcefully cough it out. Huang Yi rebuked her and gave her a few words of advice before leaving to do her work. When she was the only one left in the room, her face revealed a rare blank expression. Only when she was alone would she let down her guard a little. She looked at the purple and black bayberries in her hand and was puzzled. Xiao, what kind of attitude did he have towards her? When they first met, she was cold and distant. After entering the residence, he had asked her to accompany him to eat and serve him with his brush and ink. She had repeatedly tested his bottom line, but it was always like punching cotton and was imperceptibly deflected by him. He personally taught her how to write. Although his demands were harsh, she didn't see that he disliked her dog-like handwriting. After being poisoned, he didn't leave her to fend for herself. Instead, he ordered someone to pull her out of the hands of the King of Hell. Shouldn't he be watching her being poisoned to death? Only then would he have a legitimate reason to abandon this marriage that everyone in the prince's residence was dissatisfied with. Why was he willing to lower himself to feed her? She had always felt the tolerance of the King of England's household towards her. This tolerance was not because they liked her, but because of the imperial edict, and they respected her perfunctorily. She had been waiting for them, or them to explode. Although she had suffered some small difficulties during this period of time, it was not enough to reach the apex. She seemed to be living a carefree life, but in fact, she was afraid in her heart. Because she was waiting for the unknown to erupt, she was still restless. It was as if he was trapped in a small world and could not move, with a sharp knife hanging from his neck that could fall at any time. She was not living an easy life. Her smile was pure and innocent, and her words were cute and interesting. She often acted ignorant and stupid, but it was just to relax their guard against her. But just as she was calculating the time and waiting for the knife to fall, Xiaosu's every move made her confused and unable to see the situation clearly. What was the elusive Xiaosu thinking? She was not narcissistic enough to think that she had what he wanted, or that she had a treasure map. Otherwise, how could he treat her differently? Unable to guess his thoughts, Chu Qingyan felt that the bayberries on the plate suddenly lost their color. She couldn't help but put this person on the bed and sighed. Did everyone who transmigrated have to face such a life of fear? Just because their souls were different, so they had to be wary of this different world? Her teeth were sore and soft. It should be because she ate too much bayberries. Chu Qingyan's expression was tired. She felt that there was still a fruity fragrance lingering in her mouth, so she couldn't help but give up. Forget it. It was better not to think too much about this kind of brain-wasting thing. She would take it one step at a time. She threw it to the back of her mind if she couldn't figure it out. Her cloud-like mood dissipated a lot. She touched the bayberry on the plate and put it into her mouth again. Life should be lived in a timely manner. What should come would come, and there was no need to rush it. What should come would come. Thus, in the middle of the night, she had a high fever. Ethereal was dug up in the middle of the night, so he was in a bad mood. He retracted his fingers from Chu Qingyan's wrist and turned to respectfully say to his unhappy master, "Miss Chu was poisoned this time, so her foundation is much worse. Perhaps it was the wind that caused the high fever. This subordinate will write a prescription for the servants to get the medicine, and the fever will subside soon. Go." Xiaosu waved his hand to dismiss him. After he left, Xiaosu looked at the pale-faced person on the bed. His gloomy mood from being angered by her today instantly dissipated. He only felt that her rosy complexion was more pleasing to the eye, but at this time, she was an eyesore. "Lord, it's already late. You still have to attend the morning court tomorrow. Let Hong Yi take care of ninth Miss Chu. You should go rest early." Hong Yi stood at the side and said considerately. Qing Yi, who was woken up, was very unhappy. She glanced at Chu Qingyan, and then continued Hong Yi's words. "Sister Hong is right. A cold is very contagious. Lord, you should go rest. Leave this to us." "No need. You can all leave. Leave 2 servant girls outside the door on standby." Xiaosu was unmoved. After Hong Yi and Cheng Yi looked at each other, they were very surprised. Did Lord want to stay and take care of Chu Qingyan? The news of Lord personally feeding her had already spread throughout the Wang Fu. Now that he was so concerned, Could it be that Lord really treated her as the future Wang Fei? So the two of them obeyed and left, each with their own thoughts. Chu Qingyan, who had a high fever, was very restless as she lay on the bed. Her hands were tightly gripping the quilt, and from time to time, she would wave her hands and mumble something that no one knew what. Seeing this, Xiao couldn't help but sit down. He reached out and stuffed her restless hands into the quilt. That slender hand that made people afraid of accidentally breaking it surprised Xiao. She really was a child, and a mischievous child. Although she was sick, her perception of the outside world didn't dull because of it. Instead, it seemed to be more sensitive. In the midst of chaos, Chu Qingyan felt a calming force beside her. She leaned in that direction in a daze. Xiao, who was deep in thought, suddenly felt a certain someone restlessly climb onto him. Looking down, he saw that she was struggling to get into his arms. Xiao simply put his hands between her ribs. With a bit of strength, he pulled her into his arms. When Chu Qingyan's body, which was alternating between cold and hot, touched this warm embrace, she sighed comfortably and stopped moving. Xiao lowered his head to look at the person, who was peacefully curled up in his arms. Thinking of the happy scene of commoners holding children as they strolled through the streets, he couldn't help but curve his lips. It seemed that raising a child wasn't bad. Chapter 60. Ethereal yawned as he watched the servants brew the medicine. His expression was impatient, and the servants were so frightened that they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Everyone knew that Lord Ethereal was Lord's personal doctor. Not only was his medical skills superb, but he was also good-looking. Everyone treated him with respect. He was in a bad mood now, so no one dared to make a sound. He should have been sleeping soundly at this time, but he was forced out of bed. If it was Lord, he would definitely be at his beck and call without complaint. But why was it a girl who was still wet behind the ears? Moreover, it was a cold that wasn't challenging at all. He was a doctor after all. Why did he have to treat such a trivial illness? Moreover, he had to personally take care of the medicine and deliver it. Wasn't this too much of a waste? But what could he do if Lord was interested in this girl? Thus the arrogant doctor was discouraged. When Ethereal came in with the medicine bowl and saw this scene, he was instantly stunned. His first reaction was, it was the first time he saw a girl in Lord's arms. The Lord, who had never been close to girls since young, was finally willing to touch a girl. His second reaction was, what a scam! Why was this girl a 10-year-old child? My heart is so sad. Ethereal's mood fell like a cloud. Looking at the unconscious Chu Qingyan, a complicated look appeared in his eyes. Xiao saw him staring straight at her, and narrowed his eyes. Ethereal quickly lowered his head, and handed the medicine bowl over. Lord, let Miss Chu drink this bowl of medicine. After she sweats a little, her fever will go down. Xiao took the medicine, and touched the bowl with his fingers. Feeling that it was a little hot, he blew on it a few times, and prepared to feed it to her. Ethereal saw Lord, and wanted to wake her up to drink the medicine. But for some reason, when his hand touched her arm, his eyes suddenly softened, and he gently woke her up. Drink the medicine. Kongling felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Lord actually had a gentle side. He actually had a gentle side. He actually did. Xiao looked up, perhaps sensing the strangeness of Ethereal. What are you waiting for? The Lord had already given the order to chase them out. Ethereal immediately retreated. He wanted to find the fire spirit to talk about this matter. It was too terrifying. Recently, Chu Qingyan had gotten used to Xiao's cold and indifferent voice, so when she heard the familiar voice, she half opened her eyes in a daze, and only saw a blurry silver mask. It was very familiar. Knowing that the other party would not hurt her, she let down her guard, and obediently opened her mouth to let the other party feed her the medicine. Xiao's movements couldn't help but become gentler when he was sick and fragile. Chu Qingyan gulped down the bowl of medicine, and drank it for nearly a quarter of an hour. Xiao took back the bowl, and his sleeve inadvertently brushed past the corner of her lips. Chu Qingyan unconsciously used it as a tissue, and grabbed the sleeve to wipe her mouth. The remaining liquid left a brown stain on his clothes. Xiao raised an eyebrow as he looked at the person blinking her large misty eyes. He was not angry. If it was any other day, he would have already thrown such a bold person out. Why are you so good to me? Perhaps it was because she was muddle-headed from her illness, that she did not have her usual fear and caution. Chu Qingyan tilted her head, and curiously asked the question that had been in her heart for the past 2 days. This king is happy. Xiao Su did not take the words of the sick person seriously, and treated them as nonsense. However, he still paused for a while before spitting out these 4 words. This answer was in line with his personality. He did things as he pleased. Chu Qingyan let out a small sigh of relief. If it was like this, then there was nothing to worry about. Now that the medicine had taken effect, she began to feel sleepy again. She clasped her hands together and placed them in front of his chest. She found a comfortable position in his arms and peacefully closed her eyes. The person in his arms sleeping without any vigilance, and the intimacy she had unconsciously displayed, made the cold and hard wall in his heart collapse. Xiao Su gently stroked her hair. His eyes were filled with a warmth that he had never seen before. After sleeping for a while, Chu Qingyan slowly woke up. She had only opened half of her eyes when she saw a small figure pounce over at lightning speed. It was accompanied by a pleasantly surprised and aggrieved voice. "Master, you're finally awake. You scared the servant to death." Chu Qingyan did not need to think to know that it was Xining. She knew that she was the only one in the Fu who would make such a fuss. However, she was also someone who truly cared about her. She couldn't help but give a faint smile. "I'm fine. Don't worry." Seeing that her master's face was a little pale, but her spirit was fine, Xining finally relaxed. However, she was still a child in the end. She poured out the words that she had been holding back for the past few days. "Master, you don't know. These past few days, the Lord has personally taken care of you. Even when you had a high fever last night, the Lord didn't wear his clothes and stayed with you for the entire night. Just as he left, you woke up. Wait, the Lord said that as soon as you woke up, you should inform him." "Hey!" Before Chu Qingyan could call out to her, Xining had already disappeared. Xining said that Xiao Su took care of her for the entire night? So what she thought was a dream last night was actually real. She couldn't help being surprised. Did this iceberg lord have a change of heart? Why was he suddenly so good to her? If she wasn't a 10-year-old child, but had already reached marriageable age, perhaps she would think that he had taken a liking to her. However, that wasn't the case. She was poor and had nothing. What could she possibly have that he coveted? Could it be that it was really like what he said, that he was just acting on a whim? Just as she was letting her imagination run wild, the sound of steady footsteps came from afar. She knew that he had come. Sure enough, when she turned her head, a strong aura had already approached her bed. That tall figure had already leaned over. "Your fever has subsided." As he spoke, his hand was already on her forehead. The cold fingers brought her back to her senses. "And much better." Chu Qingyan looked at the person close to her and obediently nodded. Xiao Su withdrew his hand and straightened his body. However, he didn't sit down on the stool that Xining had prepared for him. Instead, he looked at her with his hands behind his back. "Lord, I heard from Xining that this cold caused Lord to worry about you. Qingyan is very grateful. If there is a chance in the future, Qingyan will definitely repay Lord." Chu Qingyan looked at him and sincerely thanked him. No matter why he cared about her, what she felt right now, whether it was him saving her from the gates of hell or taking care of her, it all became his kindness. A single word of thanks wasn't enough to make up for it. "As long as you're obedient," Xiao Su calmly replied. If one really wanted to look into it, she was still implicated by him, which was why she encountered this unexpected disaster. "Be obedient." Chu Qingyan felt that this answer was a bit perfunctory. Xiao Su seriously looked at the girl in front of him. Her watery eyes carried a trace of tiredness. Her normally rosy cheeks had lost a lot of weight because of the poison and illness. She was sickly pale and didn't look as pleasing to the eye as she did when she was full of vitality. "What do you want?" Xiao Su blurted out without thinking. When he saw her shocked expression, Xiao Su also felt that his words were a bit inconceivable. It wasn't like his usual style. However, words that were said were like water that was spilled, so he didn't plan on regretting it. Instead, he stared at her. Chapter 61. Can I do anything? Although Chu Qingyan was surprised, it was rare for the iceberg to take the initiative to speak. She would despise herself if she wasted this opportunity. He was used to having everything in his own hands, and rarely allowed others to speak. But when he remembered the answer sheet of his advisor, Xiao Su couldn't help but frown. As long as it's reasonable. Chu Qingyan's eyes lit up. She couldn't help but reach out and grab his sleeve, pleading, "Can I see my parents?" Ever since she entered the King of England's residence, she hadn't seen her parents. Whenever night fell, her emotions of missing her parents would start to overflow. Xiao Su took in the longing in her eyes and replied faintly, "Approved." Chu Qingyan was overjoyed. "Lord is a good person." Xiao Su was slightly stunned by her. It was the first time he was praised as a good person by a half-grown child. In the past, the rumors about him were that he was a devil who killed without batting an eyelid. Even children didn't dare to get close to him, except for Xiao Ran. These two words were really refreshing when used on him. But after the joy, Chu Qingyan had a trace of doubt in her heart. She couldn't help but look out of the window. She wondered, was it because summer had arrived and the weather had become hot, so the cold air on the big iceberg's body was also affected? So his words and actions had become more humane? But Xiao Su's next words successfully dispelled this thought. But if your body hasn't recovered in 3 days, then there's nothing to talk about. Chu Qingyan stared at the departing figure and felt helpless. Sure enough, the older the ginger, the spicier it was. "Xining, bring the medicine over." She didn't believe that she couldn't recover in 2 days. Xining answered loudly, and happily went to the kitchen to get the medicine. But when she came back, behind her was a man who looked better than a woman. When she saw that the person was ethereal, Chu Qingyan couldn't help but recall the first time she saw him. Everyone had a love for beauty. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but be dazzled when she first met him. But this person's face was indifferent, and he didn't even look at her. Chu Qingyan put away her emotions and looked at Xining, waiting for her to explain. "Master, this is the godly doctor that Lord invited, Ethereal. It's all thanks to Lord Ethereal that you were able to escape this time." Xining received her master's question and introduced him with a smile. It turned out that the person who had saved her was this man, who looked less than 20 years old. Chu Qingyan was slightly surprised, but she still acted like a child and said, "Thank you, Lord Kongling. This one can't accept this form of address." Ethereal was a bit impatient. This Chu Qingyan had a pure face and didn't have the calmness of a noble lady. Did she really need to be taken care of by Lord in the future? He somewhat looked down on this kind of pure, soft, and weak woman. Chu Qingyan sharply sensed that this person was looking down on her. She frowned and innocently guessed that she didn't seem to have offended this person. So why was she being treated with hostility? Later on, when she met him again, Chu Qingyan consciously cooperated with him and only answered his questions. Originally, she wanted to establish a friendship with him and see if he would agree to help her treat her father's illness. But looking at the current situation, the chances of success were slim. Thus, Chu Qingyan temporarily put away this thought. If she had known earlier, she would have used Xiao Su's opportunity to treat her father's illness. Ethereal saw her lowered head and timid expression, acting like a fragile doll. He couldn't help but feel even more impatient. He took her pulse and turned to leave without saying anything. Seeing him leave, Chu Qingyan put away all her emotions and thoughtfully tapped the bedside. "Master, this Ethereal is very strange." Even the little girl Xining felt his coldness towards her master. The admiration she had for him suddenly disappeared by 70%. Chu Qingyan smiled. Everyone had their own eyes. This wasn't the first time she felt others looking down on her. Ever since she entered the King of England's household, this kind of look was not strange. It wasn't that she didn't want to change this situation, but she clearly understood that no matter what she did, the effect was minimal. Because from the bottom of their hearts, they were unwilling to accept a girl like her who had no roots, no foundation, no wealth, no appearance, no wealth, and no power as the mistress of the household of the King of England. Moreover, she was still young and ignorant. Thus, Chu Qingyan didn't want to do useless work. Since it was like this, then she would really do as they thought and act as a naive and innocent child. Perhaps it would be safer and more comfortable. Thinking of this, Chu Qingyan took the bowl of medicine from Xining's hand and drank it in one gulp. My God, why is it getting more bitter? Chu Qingyan's face wrinkled into a chrysanthemum, and her expression was very conflicted. Ethereal, is it? We formed a big grudge. With Xiao Su's verbal agreement, Chu Qingyan actively cooperated to recuperate. She wasn't worried that Xiao Su would lie to her, because her intuition told her that he wasn't that kind of person. Thus, along with her good mood, Chu Qingyan's body quickly recovered. When Xiao Su entered the room, Chu Qingyan couldn't wait to change her clothes and sat on the chair, waiting for him. As soon as she saw Xiao Su, she immediately went up to him. My body is almost fully recovered. When can I see my parents? Because Xiao Su often took the time to visit her these few days, she slowly felt that he wasn't as strict with her as before. Although he was still cold and indifferent, she didn't feel the sense of distance from him that kept people thousands of miles away. On the contrary, she felt that Xiao Su had an indescribable indulgence for her. This surprised her, but also made her secretly happy. After all, this person could be considered her financial backer in the future. People in high positions didn't like the people below them to always be afraid of them, so she was no longer as cautious and fearful of him as before. Under his unintentional indulgence, she also let go of herself. There's no hurry. I'll take you out for a walk. Xiao Su's gaze fell on her face. Her cheeks had lost a lot of weight, and were no longer as tender and chubby as before. However, those grape-like eyes were even brighter and shinier. However, at this moment, those eyes were filled with pitiful longing. Xiao Su couldn't help but find it funny. Go out for a walk. For Chu Qingyan, this was a pleasant surprise. She didn't think that he would take her out. She originally thought that she would be trapped in this palace for a long time. After all, she was still young, and had already been betrothed to someone else. The people here also rejected her. She had already decided to obediently stay here, and wait until she was completely familiar with the environment, before sneaking out to take a look. However, there was an open and above-board opportunity in front of her. If she didn't grab it, she would be stupid. Why do you suddenly want to go out for a walk? Chu Qingyan clearly knew that she couldn't be too curious, but she still couldn't help but ask. Isn't there someone who said that it wasn't easy to live, but they still haven't seen the world? Xiao Su raised his eyebrows. That was the truth that she had randomly said when she was near death. She didn't think that he would still remember it. Your Highness, you're so good. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but sigh. Xiao Su's body froze. Then he turned and walked out first. Chu Qingyan saw this, and lifted her skirt to follow. Chapter 62. It wasn't until they left the palace, and got on the carriage, that Chu Qingyan finally understood what he meant when he said they were going out for a walk. It was to have the carriage circle around the capital. Chu Qingyan looked at the rouge and face powder stalls, cute little trinket stalls, and sparkling red sugar-coated haws. She swallowed her saliva, and put away the desire in her eyes. Then she turned her head to look at the person sitting in front of her with his eyes closed. This time his mask did not reveal his eyes and lips like in the palace, but covered everything. Everything below his nose was covered by a silver mask, only revealing a pair of cold and threatening eyes. Right now his eyes were closed and his thick and long eyelashes were like butterfly wings, making people's hearts itch. Chu Qingyan tilted her head as she thought. To have this kind of enviable pair of beautiful eyes, what kind of face did he have? She heard that the fire that year had destroyed his face, so he had been wearing a mask for the past 10 years. From then on, no one had ever seen his true face. She felt that sometimes the heavens were unfair. He would give some people things that others did not have, but at the same time, he was fair because he would also take away things that normal people had. For example, Xiao Su. He had a unique status and power, but at the same time, he had lost his face. But a long time later, she found out that compared to his incomparably noble status, he was more inclined towards an ordinary life. After practicing martial arts for many years, his 5 senses were better than normal people's. So when Chu Qingyan's gaze fell on him, he had already sensed it. If it was anyone else, they would have already lost their life. No one had the guts to look at him for so long, but he still let her go. But after a long time, he couldn't help but notice it. Is this king better looking than the ones outside? He slowly opened his eyes and looked at her with clear eyes. Chu Qingyan was startled. She thought that since he had closed his eyes for so long, he must have fallen asleep. Who knew that her every move was already under his control? She awkwardly replied, "Of course the things outside cannot be compared to Lord. Since they can't attract you, then let's go back home," Xiao Su lazily said. Chu Qingyan regretted her previous actions and quickly shook her head. "Your Highness, I haven't looked around yet. Can we not go back first?" It was rare for her to come out, so if she went back like this, wouldn't it be too much of a loss? Xiao Su saw that she was anxious, and a ripple appeared on his lips. It was a pity that it was covered by the mask and no one else could see it. Then read carefully. Xiao Su picked up a book and flipped through it leisurely. She was lucky to have lived 2 lives, and have seen a world with advanced transportation and technology. She had also come to an ancient country with a long history. Everything was so wonderful that it was inconceivable. Coming here, this was the second time she had passed by this prosperous street. Last time, the Chu family had brought her family back. Because her future was uncertain, she didn't have the heart to appreciate it. This time she had the chance to look around. Xiao Su saw that she was looking at it with interest, so he withdrew half of his attention from her and lowered his head to flip through the book. But after a while, he felt his sleeves being gently tugged. He looked away and saw a pair of white hands grabbing his sleeves. Her pink fingernails rested on his black clothes. There was an indescribable feeling that made his heart skip a beat. He raised his eyebrows and followed the arm to look at her. Chu Qingyan understood the meaning of those beautiful eyes. "What is it?" She swallowed a mouthful of saliva and then raised her other hand. It was as if she had returned to class and raised her hand to ask questions. "Can I go down for a walk?" Chu Qingyan weakly asked. She could see the things on the street, but she couldn't touch them. It made her heart itch, so she dared to speak up. "Stop the carriage." She did not receive a reply from Xiao Su, but she heard him coldly give an order to the carriage. Chu Qingyan's eyes widened. Could it be that she had angered him, and he wanted to throw her out of the carriage? The people outside immediately stopped the carriage when they received the order. Xiao Su looked over and saw her frightened face looking at him. He understood what she was thinking. So cowardly. After Xiao Su said this, 2 curtain hats were handed over from outside. After Xiao Su put them on, he got off the carriage, leaving Chu Qingyan in a daze as she stared at the white curtain hat in her hand. Xiao Su saw that she was still in a daze and felt a little impatient. He pulled her off the carriage and took the curtain hat from her hand. He bent down and helped her put it on. "Your Highness, with your status, it's not appropriate for you to appear in this kind of place." Gu Yi, who was following beside the carriage, disagreed. When he saw his lord help Chu Qingyan put on the hat, his voice trembled in disbelief. "It's fine," Xiao Su casually replied. After making sure that she put on the hat, he stood up. Chu Qingyan looked up at the person in front of her through the white veil. He was dressed in black and stood with his hands behind his back, giving people a mysterious feeling. She suddenly understood that Xiao Su was a man of action. It seemed that she had to be a bit more quick-witted in front of him. If her reaction was half a beat slower, even if he didn't dislike her, she would still spurn herself. However, now wasn't the time to appreciate it. She smiled and asked, "Your Highness, where are we going?" "Up to you," Xiao Su said indifferently. After all, the person who wanted to get off the carriage was not him. "Ninth young Miss Chu, this is not the prince's residence. Lord's status is noble and cannot be exposed." Gui sternly corrected her. He didn't like Chu Qingyan, but because Lord was present he couldn't show it. He reminded her very coldly. Chu Qingyan stuck out her tongue. Sure enough, like people brought up like subordinates. Even his words were so cold. But he was right. Usually, nobles like them would not condescend to walk on the streets. Moreover, Xiao Su's reputation among the common people was not good. Perhaps there were enemies lying in ambush. So Chu Qingyan thought about it and said to the person beside her, "Then I'll call you young master. You can call me Kai Kai." My status is young master's servant. How about it? Up to you. Xiao Su looked indifferent again. Then let's go. Chu Qingyan had already spotted an interesting place. With Xiao Su's permission, she immediately walked towards it. Gu Rong and Gu Yi looked at each other. How could a servant walk in front of her master? And looking at their master's appearance, it seemed like he didn't intend to make a fuss about it. They were secretly surprised, but didn't dare delay. They ordered the driver to find a place to wait for them, and then followed the two in front. Chapter 63. Just now, when Chu Qingyan was in the carriage, she had already noticed the stall selling sugar figurines. So when Xiao Su agreed, she immediately rushed over like a wild horse. Gu Rong and Gu Yi felt even more uncomfortable. How could there be such a person who would not only walk in front of their master, but also run so fast? They originally thought that their master would scold her for not following the rules, but looking at their master's expression, it seemed that he didn't care about Chu Qingyan's violation of the rules at all. The two of them could only keep silent. Chu Qingyan ran to the front of the stall, and like many other children of her age, she stared at the craftsman. She saw that the craftsman first used an oil felt to gently rub on the stone slab, and then used a very delicate small copper spoon to scoop out a little syrup. Then he tilted it slightly, and the syrup slowly flowed out. The craftsman immediately lifted it up, and the golden syrup seemed to be hanging in mid-air. Following that, the beneficiary's wrist nimbly moved up and down. She didn't know how he did it, but a lively little monk appeared. Then, when the sugar figurine cooled and took shape, the craftsman added 2 drops of sugar paste on it, and quickly stuck it on a bamboo stick. Then, he casually stuck it on the straw handle, and continued to repeat the action just now. Chu Qingyan was dazzled. This was the traditional culture passed down from ancient times. She was amazed by the breadth and profoundness of the 5,000 years of culture. When she was in Yugu City, she had seen it before, but she wasn't as skilled as the craftsman in front of her. There were so many patterns. Looking at the increasing number of sugar figurines, animals, flowers and plants on the straw handle, she couldn't help but be entranced. Cough cough. Chu Qingyan was startled back to reality by the sound beside her. She turned her head and found that Gu Rong was staring at her, and Gu Yi's expression was also very bad. Chu Qingyan then remembered the person behind her. She was a little annoyed. How could she forget about him? She didn't know if he was angry. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but slowly turn her head to look at the person behind her. She stole a glance at him, trying to see if he was angry from his expression. Xiao Su, who was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, had originally seen her staring at the craftsman's every move with a serious expression. She looked like an inexperienced little rabbit who was curious about everything. However, at this moment, she turned her head and looked at him with a fawning expression. Xiao Su had no experience in taking care of children. If it was in the past, he wouldn't have been able to guess what she was thinking. However, after reading the parenting manuals his subordinates had given him, he often took them out to study and explore the knack of it. At this moment, he remembered that one of his aides had written that when a child saw candy, their eyes would light up. They would always act spoiled and shamelessly ask adults to buy them. Occasionally, they could buy some to give the child a little sweetness. Xiao Su raised his eyebrows. You want it? Chu Qingyan could not follow his train of thought. What? Meanwhile, the craftsmen in the stall had long noticed these people who were dressed out of the ordinary. However, due to their unapproachable aura, they had not asked. Now that the noble man in the lead had spoken, the craftsman immediately welcomed them with a smile. Dear customer, which one do you like? I'll get it for you. Chu Qingyan glanced at the craftsman, then looked at Xiao Su. Seeing that his expression was indifferent and non-committal, Chu Qingyan finally understood what he meant. She breathed a sigh of relief, and was instantly elated. With Xiao Su's permission, she carefully picked out the clay figurines on the straw handle. Unfortunately, they were all very lifelike, so she didn't know which one to choose. Xiao Su saw that she was hesitating for a long time, and became a little impatient. He said to the craftsman, We'll take all of these. Chu Qingyan was shocked. She quickly waved her hand and casually pointed at one. This one will do. If it was like what he said and he bought all of them, she wouldn't be able to eat so much. Xiao Su ignored her and stared at the craftsman. Seeing that he had met a generous customer, the craftsman quickly picked up all the sugar figurines on the straw handle. As he worked, he smiled at Chu Qingyan and said, Miss, you're so lucky to have such a good father. Everyone's faces darkened. Gu Rong and Gu Yi nonsense. My lord hasn't married yet. How could he have a child? Chu Qingyan, Big Ice Cube won't be angry, right? Xiao Su did not react. Chu Qingyan was surprised, but she still hurriedly explained, Boss, don't misunderstand. This is my family's young master. I'm just a servant. This time, it was the craftsman's turn to be shocked. These two did not look like master and servant. Moreover, how could a master accommodate a servant and even buy things for her? If it was really as this girl said, then he could only say that you city people really knew how to have fun. Chu Qingyan was holding a dignified sugar figurine in her hand. Somewhat overwhelmed by the favor, she pulled the sleeve of the person beside her and said softly, You bought too much. Xiao Su glanced at her and said indifferently, This prince never mistreats his own people. Chu Qingyan stood there in a daze. Not mistreating her own people? Was she hallucinating? Was she already acknowledged? Perhaps it was because she hadn't reacted for a long time, and the crowd was slowly increasing. So Xiao Su didn't think too much about it, and pulled her forward to avoid a carriage that was speeding towards them. Let's go. Xiao Su let go of her, and took the lead to walk away. Chu Qingyan lowered her head to look at her wrist. That cold touch did not seem to have dissipated from her skin. Chu Qingyan chuckled and followed the person in front of her. Gu Rong and Gu Yi, who were shocked by the scene in front of them again and again, lowered their heads to look at their hands full of sugar figurines. They felt as if they had been struck by lightning. Everything was an illusion, right? The craftsman at the side was dumbfounded as he watched the two people walking further and further away. Didn't they say that they were master and servant? What's going on? You city people really knew how to have fun. The dazzling array of goods and cosmetics dazzled Chu Qingyan. In addition, she felt that the people around her really treated her like a child. Chu Qingyan no longer restrained herself and walked around looking. Whenever she saw something, Xiao Su would order someone to buy it. Chu Qingyan felt more and more that this cold lord was quite humane. It was just that the two bodyguards had to suffer, because their hands were full of small things that they bought along the way. Xiao Su followed behind her. Although his steps seemed casual, he was always at least 3 steps away from Chu Qingyan. Every time Chu Qingyan turned her head, she would be able to see him. Then she would feel at ease and continue to play with the things on the stall. Chu Qingyan felt that sometimes it was quite strange. He was obviously such a noble and indifferent person. She thought that he would dislike this kind of bustling city, but she did not expect him to be so calm and not show any dissatisfaction. This made Chu Qingyan snort in amazement. When they were almost done shopping, Chu Qingyan walked side by side with him. At this time, the number of people slowly increased. Perhaps it was because the rain had finally cleared up after a few days, but many people came out to walk. Chu Qingyan's shoulder was bumped by someone, and she was almost pushed down. Just as she was frowning, a pair of large hands took her small hand and retreated to the side. Then he waited for the crowd to pass before letting go of her hand. Pay attention to the road, don't look left and right. This lecturing tone really sounded like a father lecturing his daughter. Chu Qingyan was amused by the idea that popped into her head. She humbly nodded. I understand, young master. You want to see your father? When they reached a secluded place, Xiao Su seemed to speak casually. Chu Qingyan, who was playing with the little things in her hands, suddenly brightened. Yes, can I? Because Chu Qingyan disliked the white veil blocking her vision, she had already lifted it. At this time, a pair of large eyes were especially bright as she looked at him. Xiao Su did not say anything, but continued to walk forward. The veil covered his expression, so Chu Qingyan could not see what he was thinking. Moreover, he did not say anything and ignored her. She was a little anxious, so in her anxiety, she did something that was instinctive and shocking. Chapter 64. In a moment of desperation, Chu Qingyan couldn't care about anything else. She ran up to him and reached out to grab his sleeve. However, a gust of wind blew, and she missed the corner of his sleeve. Instead, she stumbled and grabbed onto something cold and soft. Xiao narrowed his eyes and subconsciously wanted to fling this person away. However, when he lowered his head and saw a pair of watery eyes, he was slightly dazed and stopped himself. Chu Qingyan didn't expect that she would grab onto his wrist in a moment of panic. The coldness traveled from her palm to her heart, and she couldn't help but shiver. However, it was too late for regrets. She tightened her grip on his hand and looked up at him stubbornly. "Lord, what do you mean by what you said just now?" Xiao raised his eyebrows. This girl usually looked like a yes man to him, and didn't have any temper at all. However, when it came to her family matters, her true nature was revealed. However, to be honest, this side of her was more pleasing to the eye. "You'll know when you catch up." Xiao didn't intend to say anything more and turned to leave. Unfortunately, the person beside him hadn't reacted yet, and refused to let go of his hand. Xiao was a little impatient. He used a little more strength, and easily broke free of her hand. Chu Qingyan looked at the handsome figure slowly disappearing into the crowd, and bit her lips. Her emotions were no longer as agitated as before. She calmed herself down and understood that if he did not tell her, no matter how much she asked, he would not tell her. Hence, she heaved a sigh of relief, and quickly ran towards that person. Gu Rong and Gu Yi looked at each other. This was the first time that someone could touch Lord and come out unscathed. They looked at Chu Qingyan in disbelief. For some reason, Chu Qingyan felt that she couldn't keep up with the person in front of her. It was a little strenuous to jog. She rolled her eyes at him. Didn't he know the difference in physical strength between men and women? Didn't he know that her legs were shorter? In the end, she had no choice. Worried that she would lose him, Chu Qingyan reached out to hold his finger without thinking. In any case, so many people had mistaken him for her father along the way. It was natural for a daughter to hold her father's hand, wasn't it? Although Xiao was walking in front, he was paying attention to what was behind him. When he saw her reach out her hand, he instinctively wanted to avoid it. But in the end, he didn't know why he didn't move away. That pair of soft, boneless hands were embedded in his palm, like a budding flower bud being held in his palm. His fingers were slightly stiff, and he didn't move at all. If the flower bud was too light, it would fall off. If it was too heavy, it would be crushed. After putting her hand in his, Chu Qingyan was still looking at the gauze hat, but she couldn't see anything special about it. However, she felt that it was a good sign that he didn't shake her off. Since he treated her like a child, then she should properly exercise her rights as a child and build a good relationship with him. Her life would be better in the future. Chu Qingyan completely didn't realize that perhaps it was from this step that she and he began to fall. After testing it out, Chu Qingyan boldly opened her fingers and firmly held his hand. She wanted to see how he was going to shake her off like this. Her tender fingers were warm, and they were wrapped around his fingertips. They seeped into his skin and into his blood. They broke through the ice and gradually merged into his heart. A crack appeared in his frozen heart, and that wisp of fragrance wormed its way in. Perhaps, her journey of breaking through the ice quietly began at this moment. He couldn't help but lower his head to look at the person beside him. Her tender face was as innocent as a child, and her large watery eyes flashed with a hint of success. He should have reprimanded her for her rudeness, but at the last moment, he tightened his grip on her fingers and held them tightly in his palm. His footsteps also slowed down, and he looked forward. His tone was still indifferent. "Watch the road." Chu Qingyan immediately looked forward and saw a man in his prime pushing a wooden cart with wooden buckets coming towards them. She immediately dodged to his side and patted her chest. She was no longer distracted and followed the person beside him closely. Thus, this small accident made her forget about their interaction just now. She held his hand tightly, afraid that another accident would happen. This father and daughter pair is so handsome. Just by looking at their figures, I can feel that they are extraordinary. The passers-by noticed the two of them, and couldn't help but sigh. Chu Qingyan felt that it was funny, but she also felt that Xiao was wronged. He hadn't even started a family yet, but he was already labeled as the father of a 10-year-old child. She wondered if he was sullen in his heart. Xiao Su never paid attention to such gossip, so when the exclamations of the passers-by reached his ears, he just held the person in his hand tightly and strode forward calmly. On the other hand, Gu Rong and Gu Yi, who were carrying a large pile of things behind them, stared at the passers-by with eyes as sharp as knives. At the same time, they were full of shock. Lord actually allowed that girl to hold his hand. It was simply too inconceivable. Chu Qingyan also didn't know where he was going. She only felt that the more they walked, the fewer people there were, and the more comfortable the air was. At this time, Xiao Su stopped at a restaurant. Chu Qingyan followed his line of sight and looked up at the plaque, Yellow Crane Tower. The dark gold strokes were inlaid on the dark red plaque, revealing a grand atmosphere. She couldn't help but think of a poem that she had learned before. The people of the past had already left on the Yellow Crane, leaving the Yellow Crane Tower empty. The Yellow Crane left and never returned. The white clouds lingered in the sky for 1,000 years. Perhaps the name of this place came from this poem. However, she didn't know if this dynasty had experienced the Tang dynasty, because this dynasty had never appeared in her memory. Perhaps the textbooks had missed it and didn't record it. As Xiao Su stepped into the restaurant, the aroma of food greeted them. Chu Qingyan thought, could it be that he wanted to have lunch here? Then what about the matter of meeting her parents? Even though she had doubts in her heart, Chu Qingyan still calmed down and followed him. Under the warm greetings of the waiter, their group went up to the second floor. At this time, a black-clothed man came up with a smile. Master. Chu Qingyan remembered this person. When Xiao Ran wanted to punish her, he was the one who stopped him. She was a bit puzzled as to why he would appear here. Guoling's sharp eyes saw the hands that were held together, and a surprised and complicated expression flashed in his eyes. Where is she? Xiao Su looked at him. Guoling smiled and said, I've already brought her here. You can rest assured with this subordinate taking care of things. Chu Qingyan didn't understand their questions and answers, but there was a strong thought in her heart. She couldn't help but look at Xiao Su. The person you want to see is inside, Xiao Su lightly said to her. Chu Qingyan's face lit up with joy. She wanted to run in, but she thought of something and could only look at him eagerly. She looked like a little dog wagging its tail. Xiao Su raised his hand and pinched her cheek, then said generously, Go in. Chu Qingyan immediately pushed open the door and stepped in as if she had been pardoned. The two people who were playing the red string game inside were shocked, and then delighted. Kai, you're here. The family of three was finally reunited. Chu Qingyan threw herself into Mother Chu's arms and said in a choked voice, Mother, Father, I missed you so much. Mother Chu's eyes were also wet. Kai, Mother missed you too. Father Chu opened his arms and hugged the two of them, imitating Mother Chu's words and sobbing. Kai, Mother missed you too. Xiao Su watched this happy and harmonious scene from outside the door, and a faint shadow flashed across his eyes. Since he was young, this kind of warmth had been very far away from him, and he had always been a bystander. Chu Qingyan only then remembered that Xiao Su had actually left her to the side. She hurriedly turned to introduce her parents to him, but she didn't expect her father to rush up before her. Because they had entered the private room, Xiao Su casually took off his veil and revealed his silver mask, but he didn't expect someone to rush up to him and shout happily, Son-in-law, it's me, Father. Chapter 65. Father Chu's shout instantly drew everyone's attention, and at the same time, he broke out in cold sweat. Chu Qingyan covered her face. Daddy, don't mess around. Mother Chu's face was pale. Yuanling, restrain yourself, this is not an ordinary person. Gu Rong and Gu Yi despised. Birds of a feather flock together, like daughter like father. Xiao Su looked at the person who suddenly appeared in front of him, and the bad memories of Mao Village came to his mind. His eyes dimmed, and he said coldly, Old Master Chu, you've recognized the wrong person. Father Chu immediately shook his head like a rattledrum, his eyes still shining. Inverted scallion. How could I forget you, my son-in-law? Don't forget, I've hugged you before. That's why I've always remembered your figure. Being hugged by a man is not a good thing. Xiao Su's face was cold, and he looked at Chu Qingyan like an arrow. Chu Qingyan received the instructions from the cold-faced lord, and immediately jumped over, pulling her father back and persuading in a low voice. Dad, he's the eldest prince of the royal family. How could he be an inverted scallion? You must have remembered it wrongly. Mother Chu also came up to persuade. Yuanlang, don't mess around, this is Lord. Let's go to the side and play. Father Chu straightened his neck and insisted on turning his head to shout at Xiao Su. Liar. Even if you're Lord, you're still my inverted scallion son-in-law. If you don't believe me, let me hug you again. I'll make you accept it wholeheartedly. Xiao Su's face darkened instantly. Gui said angrily. How dare you? Lord's status is honorable. How can you blaspheme him? Father Chu was shaken by Gu Yi's ferocious roar. He suddenly began to sob. With an aggrieved expression, he pulled his daughter's hand and pointed in Xiao Su's direction, sobbing. Kai, you don't recognize your father anymore. He promised to weave a fishing net for me. He didn't keep his word. Then he glared at Xiao Su, liar. Then, she turned to her daughter and complained pitifully. Chu Qingyan was a little embarrassed. What's wrong with her father today? Why did he suddenly hold on to Xiao Su and not let go? The two clearly had nothing to do with each other, and it was impossible for them to have anything to do with each other. But why was her father so angry when he saw Xiao Su? That day in the village, she and her father had indeed saved a man. After that, the man left them some money and left. She didn't expect that her father would still miss him. Even after a few months, he still couldn't forget about him. However, her father had never lied. Chu Qingyan found it strange, and couldn't help but stare at Xiao Su carefully. She tried to recall the characteristics of that person, but she couldn't figure anything out. She rubbed her nose, but still held on to her father dutifully, in case he did something inappropriate again. With Xiao Su's group around, Mother Chu didn't know how to start a private conversation with her daughter. Instead, Chu Qingyan kept asking her mother about their recent situation. Mother Chu Qingyan was afraid of outsiders, so she kept her mouth shut. The happy Chu Qingyan also gradually sensed that the atmosphere wasn't right, and she looked at Xiao Su awkwardly. Xiao Su knew his place, so he stood up and said coldly to Chu Qingyan, 1 hour. What he meant was that he would only give her an hour to reminisce. Chu Qingyan smiled at him gratefully, thinking that the big ice cube was sometimes quite considerate. Although it was only 1 hour, she was already satisfied. Xiao Su was about to leave, but when he turned around, he saw Father Chu blocking the door. Father Chu had been glaring at him from the side. Although he didn't want to admit that he was the one, it didn't affect Father Chu's judgment. Father Chu trusted his intuition very much, and when he saw that Xiao Su was about to leave, he immediately stopped him. Old Master Chu, what are you doing? Gui was a little angry. They had been impatient with Lord being pestered by this idiot again and again today. But Lord didn't seem to mind, so they endured it. Now that he was blocking the way, they were furious. Father Chu raised his head and said proudly, with me here, don't even think of taking a step out. Chu Qingyan didn't understand why her father was so obsessed with Xiao Su. She went up to Xiao Su in a panic and apologized. Lord, my father doesn't mean any harm. Please be magnanimous and don't take offense. Xiao Su looked at the person blocking the door like a door god and frowned slightly. This prince's patience is limited. What he meant was that he wanted Chu Qingyan to solve it quickly. You can't leave, Kai. You can't let him leave. Last time he sneaked away. It wasn't easy for us to see him again. If we let him slip away this time, when will we see him again? Father's fishing net hasn't been finished yet. Father Chu blinked his teary eyes, looking like a child who had lost his favorite toy. Everyone was dumbfounded. Only Chu Qingyan and Mother Chu were left dumbfounded. However, this put Chu Qingyan in a difficult position. On one side was her father, and on the other side was the ice cube. She couldn't defend the ice cube, but she didn't want her father to be sad. In the end, Chu Qingyan could only turn to look at the tall person in front of her helplessly. Lord, my father seems to like you a lot. Can you stay for a while? Father Chu's ears immediately perked up. Xiao Su frowned as he looked at Father Chu, whose eyes were darting around. He then looked at Chu Qingyan, who was in a difficult position. In the end, he did not say anything. Instead, he walked to another table and sat down, leaving the family of three alone. Huiling's eyes widened. It was rare to see Lord being so easy to talk to. Chu Qingyan heaved a sigh of relief and thanked Xiao Su from the bottom of her heart. Then, she pulled her father back to their original table. Mother Chu helplessly patted Father Chu's hand and scolded softly, "You're always causing trouble. Let's see who will clean you up in the future." Father Chu raised his chin and said proudly, "Don't be afraid." Mother and daughter shook their heads helplessly at Father Chu. However, it wasn't until the end that they realized what a prophecy was. Father Chu wasn't blindly confident. Therefore, it was either Chu Qingyan's mother talking to Chu Qingyan, while Chu Qingyan's father was listening and looking at Xiao Su, or Chu Qingyan's mother was talking, while Chu Qingyan's father was interrupting and looking at Xiao Su. Anyway, no matter what, half of Father Chu's attention was on Xiao Su. It was as if he was afraid that Xiao Su would run away. Chu Qingyan was very embarrassed, but there was nothing she could do. She could only let her father do whatever he wanted. However, when she thought about how her father would be returning to the Chu family in an hour, she didn't know how to tell him not to worry about the ice cube. This gave her a headache. An hour later, Father Chu shamelessly refused again. No, Father won't go. Father wants us to live together as a family of 4. Father. Chu Qingyan felt helpless and sad. Actually, she didn't want to be separated from her parents either. At the side, Xiao Su seemed to be touched by something. The coldness in his eyes faded slightly. He stood with his hands behind his back and said calmly to Father Chu, who was about to cry, "After a while, I'll arrange for you to catch up." "Really?" Father Chu looked at him with tears in his eyes. Yes. After receiving his affirmation, Chu Feng's father immediately stopped crying, and under everyone's dumbfounded gazes, he solemnly patted Xiao Su's shoulder and said earnestly, "Son-in-law, I'll leave my Kai to you. Don't miss Daddy too much. Dan Yang, let's go." Therefore, everyone's eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets as they watched Chu Machen's father leave. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.